Chapter 463. Go to watch net. The three of them chatted and laughed. After a day on the plane, they finally arrived at Shanghai's Hongqiao airport. As soon as they got off the plane, Alba, who was tired all the way, shouted to find a hotel to stay in, but Chris and John, who had just returned to China, were full of energy and excitement. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Hardadef denied Alba's words and said, No, it's morning now. We have to hurry to Master City as soon as possible. It's quite far from here. Chris also looked at her watch and said, Well, now this country's high-speed rail is the fastest in the world. I believe we should be able to reach Tiannan City from Shanghai by noon. We can even make it to Tiannan University for lunch there. John shouted exaggeratedly, Oh my God, the food in this school is terrible. I'll starve to death if I line up. Chris shrugged. Then let's eat near the school. Hardadef said with a smile. Good idea, my treat. Alba couldn't help but say angrily, Are you too used to ignoring me? Aren't you afraid that I'll make trouble for you? Chris and John turned their heads at the same time and looked at Alba strangely. The two of them suddenly started talking in Chinese. John said, Chris, I think we'd better use the method in Saw. Chris shook her head. That's too bloody. John said exaggeratedly, Isn't the Texas Chainsaw Murderer bloody? Chris said seriously, I think it's better if you teach her a few curses, and then let her go to the gate of the Chinese government to greet those officials. As long as she does this, she will be sent back to her country immediately if she isn't thrown into a black prison. Hardadef chuckled mischievously. That's a good idea. I like it. Alba saw the two of them talking furtively in Chinese and laughing sinisterly from time to time. Although she couldn't understand what they were talking about, she still felt creeped out. She raised her hands high and said in surrender, Okay, I won't make trouble. Don't murmur about plotting to kill me in Chinese. John laughed. Alba, you're so smart. Alba was so angry that she kicked John. You bastard, I curse you to fall off a cliff and die. John chuckled. I don't do mountain climbing or bungee jumping. Alba rolled her eyes at him. Of course I know. Otherwise, how would I dare to make such a curse? My curse is very effective. Chris tried to smooth things over by saying, Okay, let's go take the high-speed train. It's getting late. The three of them dragged their luggage and walked quickly towards the train station. The man was tall and the woman was beautiful. They attracted many people's attention along the way. When they arrived at Tiannan City, the three of them stopped a taxi. Chris got in the car and said, Sir, please go to Tiannan University. When the taxi driver saw that such a beautiful foreign girl could speak fluent Chinese, he was shocked. He didn't dare to cheat her, so he drove the car to the school gate. At this time, the school was over at noon. The three of them stood in the crowd of black heads, which was really eye-catching, attracting the attention of the surrounding teachers and students. Alba looked at the gate and the buildings of Tiannan University with a critical face and kept shaking her head. Oh my God, this school is at least 50 years behind us. Can this school produce a Superman? I don't believe it. John was very excited when he thought that he would see Li Yundong soon. It was rare that he didn't bicker with her. He just looked around as if he wanted to find Li Yundong's figure. Chris, who was standing on her tiptoes, was also looking into the distance. After looking for a while, she suddenly saw a familiar figure. She immediately waved her arms in surprise and shouted, Feng! Feng! She shouted a few times, but the other party ignored her. Only then did she realize that she had called the wrong person, so she shouted again, Feng Na! Feng Na, who was talking with Cheng Cheng in the school and walking out of the school, heard the shout. She raised her head and curiously looked in the direction of the voice. When she saw who it was, she was suddenly stunned. Chris? Why is she here? Is the school having an exchange activity again? Cheng Cheng, who was standing to the side, rolled her eyes. She snorted and said with a very ambiguous smile, The foreign horse is here to steal your lover. Feng Na glared at her. My man? I don't have a lover. Cheng Cheng said with a smirk, Don't pretend. She's your dream lover, you know. The smile on Feng Na's face suddenly faded. She sighed softly and said, It's not my turn. Don't make such a joke. I don't even dare to dream about such a thing. Come on, let's go see Chris. I don't know why they're here. Feng Na and Cheng Chang had attended Zhou Qin's birthday party with Chris and the others, so they had a good relationship in private. When they parted ways, they had exchanged gifts with each other. Feng Na greeted her with a smile and said in English, "Chris, why are you here?" However, Chris replied in Chinese with a smile on her face, "I'm here for Li Yundong." After she finished speaking, Cheng Cheng, who was beside her, quietly pinched Feng Na's arm. Feng Na glanced at Cheng Cheng and sighed in her heart. She still replied politely in English, "Chris, did you come all the way here just to see Li Yundong?" Chris didn't know that the girl in front of her was already a little jealous. She blinked and said, "Yes, I came to find him." John also came over and said, "I also came to find him." Alba didn't want to be left out. She leaned over and said seriously, "I came to scold him." Feng Na looked at Alba with a strange expression and thought to herself, "Who is this woman? Is she crazy?" Although Feng Na felt strange, she still smiled politely at Alba and then said to Chris, "Li Yundong hasn't been to school for a long time." Chris and John were shocked at the same time. "What? He dropped out of school?" Feng Na shook her head. "No, he just went through the formalities of suspension." John smiled bitterly. "Damn it, what should we do? Where did he go?" Chris quickly asked, "What is he doing now?" Feng Na's eyes showed strong admiration, and she said proudly, "He has opened a tea house of his own. I went there last time it opened." Cheng Cheng also showed off excitedly, although she had used this matter more than once. "Do you know who went to the opening ceremony?" "The secretary of the provincial party committee, the top leader." "Ah, it's equivalent to your governor." "Governor?" Chris, Alba, and John exclaimed in surprise at the same time and looked at each other. In the United States, politicians like governors often made some show of being close to the people, and it was not uncommon for them to see or even talk to the governor. However, it was not a small matter for any enterprise to invite a governor for the opening. This was a manifestation of resources and connections. Chris knew that Li Yundong was extraordinary and had superhuman strength, but she didn't know that he had such a political background. She was stunned for a moment and asked, "Where is this tea house? Can you take us there?" Feng Na and Cheng Cheng looked at each other, then Feng Na smiled and said, "Okay, I'll call him and see if he's there." She took out her cell phone and made a call, but no one answered. Feng Na couldn't help but say angrily, "That be asterisk starred. I told him last time not to use his cell phone as a landline, but he didn't listen." She said helplessly to Chris, "Forget it, let's go straight to him. His tea house has only been open for less than a month. I believe that he should be taking care of the business in the tea house every day. If we go there and take advantage of him, it can be considered as robbing the rich to help the poor." Chris smiled slightly. John also shouted excitedly, "Master has opened a tea house. That's amazing. I want to go and have tea too." Only Alba, who was dragging her luggage, shouted, Hey, are you going to run around with your luggage?" However, after complaining for a while, she saw that Chris and John were talking and laughing with Feng Na and Cheng Cheng, ignoring her at all. She immediately stomped her feet resentfully and chased after them angrily. When the group arrived at the Desanxian tea house on the pedestrian street of Tiannan City, Feng Na was surprised to find that the door of the Desanxian tea house was closed. She was shocked and quickly found the receptionist of Zhao's tea house across the street. "Hello, may I ask why the tea house across the street isn't open?" The receptionist said gloatingly, "It's been closed for 16 days. Feng Na turned pale with fright. "What happened?" The receptionist shook her head slightly. "I don't know." Feng Na was stunned. It took her a while to react. She forced a smile at the receptionist and said, "Thank you, sorry to disturb you." When she turned around and walked back, she heard the receptionist at the door whisper, "According to them, it would be strange if they didn't close the door." That's right. How can they solicit customers like that? Hearing this, Feng Na felt strange. She turned her head to look at them, only to see that the receptionists were looking straight ahead, as if they hadn't said anything at all. Feng Na was suspicious, and Chris, who was next to her, also asked in surprise, "Feng Na, what happened?" Feng Na shook her head with a worried expression. "I don't know, but something must have happened. Damn it, I don't know where Li Yundong lives, and he doesn't answer my phone. What should I do? What should I do?" Alba saw that the two of them were speaking Chinese, so she pulled hard enough to translate. After listening, she sneered and said, This guy named Li Yundong must be afraid that I'll scold him, so he's hiding like a coward. When Feng Na and Chang Cheng heard this, they immediately became furious and glared at Alba. Just as Feng Na was about to retort, she suddenly heard two people coming over and whispering to each other. This Zhenren Li is really cautious. For the Taoist assembly, he actually handed over the shop to those coquettish foxes early. Now he's even closed the shop. Hey, do you think he's preparing some powerful magic treasure? It's possible, but no matter how much he prepares, it's useless. Hey, Shi Xiang is really worrying for nothing. Once his powerful magical weapon is refined, no matter how capable Li Yundong is, he will have to admit defeat. That's not necessarily true. Zhenren Li's ability is not just for show. He has to fight. Humph, what do you mean by fighting? There are so many coquettish foxes around this guy. Even if he can fight, the iron pestle will be ground into embroidery needles. When the Taoist assembly comes, his legs will be weak. How can he fight? Speaking of this, the two of them giggled in a low voice. When Feng Na heard them mention Zhenren Li, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She remembered that at the opening ceremony, hadn't someone also called Li Yundong Zhenren Li? She thought to herself, could the Zhenren Li these two guys are talking about be Li Yundong? Thinking of this, Feng Na couldn't help stepping forward and asking, hello, is the Zhenren Li you're talking about Li Yundong? The two of them hadn't expected that their casual conversation would be overheard by Feng Na. They were slightly shocked, looked Feng Na up and down, and asked warily, who are you? Chapter 464. Go to Watch Network. Feng Na smiled and said, I'm Li Yundong's friend. Then she turned around and pointed at Chris and John, saying, my friend and I have something urgent to discuss with him. Oh. The two of them looked at each other, and one of them sneered and said, why are you looking for Li Yundong? When John heard their conversation, he leaned over and said, I'm looking for my master. I'm his disciple. The two men's expressions changed at the same time, and they exclaimed, you're Li Yundong's disciple? John had even dared to say that he was Li Yundong's disciple in front of Li Yundong, let alone in front of two strangers. He nodded vigorously and said, yes, I'm his disciple. The two men were shocked and angry. They looked at each other and thought, how dare Li Yundong break the rules of the cultivation world and accept a foreigner as his disciple? He's too bold, isn't he? One of them suppressed his anger and said, he may have gone to Dongwu City to participate in the Taoist assembly. You can go and find him yourself. When John heard this, he was overjoyed. Okay, I'll go and find my master right away. After that, he was about to leave. Chris was very careful and quickly asked, may I ask where the Taoist assembly will be held in Dongwu City? The two men saw that Chris had blonde hair and blue eyes. Her figure was exquisite, and her skin was as white as cheese. She was a rare beauty. They were shocked, and one of them asked subconsciously, are you also his disciple? Before Chris could say anything, John rushed to say, yes, so is she. The two of them suddenly gasped and thought with envy and anger. This bastard actually accepted such a beautiful foreign woman as his disciple. This was simply too lawless. Why can't such a good thing happen to me? One of them sneered and said, the Taoist assembly will be held on a tanker in the moat of Dongwu City in 2 days. You'll know when you get to the wharf of Xueqi. After that, he snorted angrily and left in a huff. The other man chased after him and whispered, Shi Xiang, why did you tell them about the Taoist assembly? The man said angrily, didn't you see that they are all Li Yundong's disciples? Since they were all cultivators, what was there to hide? Moreover, Li Yundong, this bastard, was greedy and lustful. He had actually broken the rules of the cultivation world and taken a foreigner as his disciple. How can we not teach him a lesson? The other man asked curiously, what does letting them go to the Taoist assembly have to do with teaching Li Yundong a lesson? The man sneered and said, when Shixiang Wang Lingfei's powerful magical weapon is refined, he will definitely teach Li Yundong a lesson. What could be more humiliating than losing face in front of his disciple? This Li Yundong should take a piss and look at himself in the mirror. How dare he break the rules of the cultivation world? Even if it's going to be broken, it should be our Zhengyi school who will be the first to break it. It's not his turn. Another person also chuckled. That's right. This guy isn't afraid of being coquettish. He raised a vixen at home, and now he's raising a foreign horse. I wonder if he can handle it? It doesn't matter. If he can't handle it, when senior brother Wang defeats him, his disciples will definitely scatter. At that time, we can help him share the burden. After that, both of them burst out laughing. Feng Na and the others didn't know what these two gentle scum of the Zhangyi school were up to. They thought that they were kindly instructing them to go to Dongwu City. Feng Na glanced at Chris helplessly and said, Li Yundong should be in Dongwu City to participate in this Taoist assembly. Otherwise, there would be no reason for him to ignore the tea house. You can go to Dongwu City to find him. Chris asked, Feng Na, aren't you going with us? Feng Na shook her head and said with a wry smile, No, Dongwu City is quite far away. We still have things to do, so we can't go. You go by yourselves. I have no other choice. If there's really no other way, let's keep in touch by cell phone. Chris thought for a moment and said, Well, give me your cell phone number. After exchanging cell phone numbers, they parted ways and left. Alba hadn't expected that her journey would be bumpy. Not only could she not rest in the hotel, but she also had to rush to another city. She couldn't help but sigh and complain while dragging her luggage. In her heart, she had already cursed Li Yundong 10,000 times. Chris ignored her. She just pulled Hardadef and whispered, Hardadef, how can you say that we are Li Yundong's disciples in front of others? Hardadef said proudly, Chris, Chinese people are very proud. If I say this, everyone will know that I, Hardadef, am his disciple. He has no choice but to accept me. Hee, it's the same for you. You should thank me. Chris rubbed her temples with her hands and said in Chinese with a wry smile, You are a simple-minded fool. You will definitely cause trouble. Don't you know that Chinese people are very serious about apprenticing? This is called acting first and reporting later. It's very impolite and stupid. Li Yundong will definitely be angry. Be careful not to be fooled by your cleverness. Hardadef was shocked and said with some fear, Really? Then why didn't you stop me just now? Chris glared at him and said, Could I have stopped you? You spoke so fast. Hardadef said with a wry smile, Then what should I do? What if Master is really angry and refuses to accept me? Should we still go to Dongwu City? Chris rolled her eyes at him and said, You came all the way from the United States. Don't you want to go to Dongwu City? Don't you know that there is a saying that when things come to a head, you need to be brave? The two of them whispered, but Alba, who was following them, couldn't understand what they were talking about in Chinese. She couldn't help shouting, Hey, what are you talking about? Don't use Chinese, okay? Can you use a language I can understand? Hey, I'm talking to you. Hey, what are you talking about? What do you mean by when things get wet, you need to be brave? Why can't I understand? The three foreigners walked all the way to Dongwu City. At this time, on the distant Mount Wuhua, Zhang Yuan, the leader of the Yinyang sect, was carefully guarding in front of a stove, staring at the fire in it. Next to him stood Ding Nan, who was holding a golden silk palm leaf fan. The stove in front of Zhang Yuan was about 2 meters high. Its lower plate was a 3-legged support frame, and in the middle was a gourd-shaped round body. Its surroundings were dark, as if it were made of black iron. There was a blazing flame burning under the relatively wide round body of the gourd. There was an air vent in the furnace, and above the primordial spirit was a relatively narrow part, where the powerful magical weapon to be refined was suspended in the air. Exquisite patterns were engraved around the fireplace, and in the middle of the fireplace, there was a transparent window made of glazed sand, allowing people to look inside. Zhang Yuan looked at the situation inside the stove without blinking. He saw that the ruby jade was surrounded by blazing flames and a black aura. This black aura was constantly twisting under the burning flames. From time to time, it would change into a ferocious face, and from time to time, it would linger around the ruby jade and change into a trace of strange black lines engraved on it. However, more of the black aura was always wandering around the outside of the ruby jade, refusing to linger around it. It was like a vengeful spirit that had broken free from hell, constantly struggling to escape. After watching for a while, Zhang Yuan shouted without looking back, Wind! Hearing this, Ding Nan immediately fanned the golden silk palm leaf fan in her hand toward the air vent. Ding Nan had been cultivating with Zhang Yuan for a while. Her aptitude was excellent, and with the help of all kinds of elixirs and miraculous medicines, the Xianin Yuanqi in her body was not weak at all. She was only one step away from the Zhuji phase. As she fanned, the whole room was filled with a strong wind, as if a matrix vortex had appeared. This vortex swirled the air in the room crazily, and then gathered into a fist-sized eye of the wind and drilled into the air vent. As soon as the wind entered, the flames in the stove immediately flared up, forcibly driving back the black fog that was trying to escape. The stove fire was so strong that the entire ruby jade and the black fog were enveloped in it. Zhang Yuan saw a blazing red flame in front of him, and he subconsciously covered his eyes with his hands. When he put his hands down again, he saw that all the black fog around the ruby jade had disappeared. The ruby jade was still suspended in the middle of the stove, crystal clear. Ding Nan also took a closer look curiously and asked, "Why is there no movement, master? Do you still want to fan it?" Zhang Yuan waved his hand nervously at Ding Nan and said, "Don't fan it yet. Let me take a look." Zhang Yuan opened the mouth of the stove and took out the ruby jade with his zhenqi. He took a closer look and saw that the ruby jade was slightly red from the heat, but the strange black lines that had been branded on it before could not be seen on its body. He immediately said to Ding Nan, "Quick, take the 9th Earth Mystic Yin method and pour it on it." Ding Nan immediately took a wooden bucket from the side and poured it on the ruby jade. As soon as it was poured, the ruby jade let out an extremely shrill roar and instantly released countless black ghosts. The faces of each ghost were twisted and ferocious, and they opened their mouths wide and roared wildly. Ding Nan was so frightened that she took 3 steps back. Her 3 souls and 7 spirits almost flew out of her body in fright. However, these ghosts only leaped out for a moment, and soon flew back on their own. When Ding Nan looked at it again, she saw that the ruby jade had returned to its original state, but from time to time, layers of dense and strange black patterns would appear all over its body. Zhang Yuan held the ruby jade in his hand and laughed proudly. "It's done. It's finally done. I've been refining it with the fire of 9 yang for 49 days, with the help of the ghosts of 81 boys and girls, and with the help of the 9th Earth Mystic Yin method, this powerful magical weapon has finally been refined." Ding Nan stared at the powerful magical weapon in Zhang Yuan's hand with her eyes wide open. She knew that Zhang Yuan had killed many children in an extremely cruel way and refined their yin spirits to refine this powerful magical weapon. She couldn't help but ask, "Master, this powerful magical weapon you refined, what magical power does it have?" Zhang Yuan carefully hid the ruby jade close to his body and smiled proudly. "Hee, the Taoist assembly is in 2 days. You'll know then." Ding Nan asked tentatively, "Is it very powerful?" Zhang Yuan laughed and said, "Of course it is." Ding Nan asked again, "How powerful is it? Can it be more powerful than Li Yundong?" Zhang Yuan sneered disdainfully and said, "Li Yundong? Humph, with this powerful magical weapon of mine, even if Taoist Zhang of the Zhengyi school came in person, he could only run away and not dare to fight with me. Li Yundong is a little bastard who has only cultivated for a few days. Who does he think he is? See how I will deal with him at the Taoist assembly and avenge you." Ding Nan was a little worried in her heart, but she didn't dare to show the slightest expression on her face. She said with a flattering smile, "Master, of course, Li Yundong is no match for you. But there will definitely be experts from various sects at the Taoist assembly. Will you be able to handle them?" Zhang Yuan smiled and said, "My powerful magical weapon is not invincible in the world. If we only consider powerful magical weapons, there are too many that are better than mine. The Sanhuang sword of the Qingqing sect, the 7-star sword of the Zhengyi school, the Bahuang and Liuhe sword of the Linggong sect, the Lost Shenyuan sword, the disaster-releasing divine sword of the Buddhist sect, and other powerful magical weapons can definitely defeat my powerful magical weapon." Zhang Yuan's tone changed and he said proudly, "However, in terms of magical weapons, the law comes first, and the weapon comes second. We fight with the law, not the weapon. No matter how powerful a magical weapon is, it depends on who is using it. Humph, my good disciple, when the Taoist assembly comes, I will show you what real magic is and what real fighting methods are." Hearing this, Ding Nan pretended to be happy and said with a flattering smile, "I hope you will show your power and defeat all the heroes." Zhang Yuan laughed out loud. He stroked his beard and pretended to be modest as he said, "Of course, there are also some experts in each sect. For example, Yu Sheng, who is known as the top master of the younger generation of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, Zhang Tianhe and Wang Lingfei of the Zhengyi school, and Zhang Zuani, the future leader of the Qingqing sect, who said that he would take first place a while ago. Most of them have powerful magical weapons in their hands, so we can't take them lightly." Ding Nan smiled and said, Although they are powerful, they are not as powerful as your powerful magical weapons and magical powers, right? This flattery made Zhang Yuan feel refreshed. He smiled proudly and said, "Good disciple, let's go now. I can't wait for the Taoist assembly." Chapter 465. Go to Watch Network. After walking in the wind and snow for a day and night, Xueqi finally arrived at the foot of Kari Holy Mountain. Watch Net. Kari Holy Mountain, located in the south of Lhasa and the north bank of the Yarlung-Zhongbua River, was one of the 4 famous holy mountains in Tibet. Because it stood majestically in the forest, it was like a sharp sword rising into the sky, towering into the clouds, majestic and magnificent, so it was called Kari, which meant touching the sky. Xueqi raised her head and looked at the majestic holy mountain. She looked up from the foot of the mountain and saw a mark that seemed to have been cut by a knife near the top of the holy mountain. In some of the ancient books that Xueqi had read, she clearly remembered that this was left by the famous hero of Tibet, King Gezer, who had shot the rock to death with an arrow. Therefore it was called Folding Winter by the world, which meant an arrow sheath. Although Xueqi had failed to build her foundation before, the Xianin qi running wildly in her body had been soothed in time. Most of it had run into Meidua's body, so it had not caused much damage to Xueqi's meridians. Moreover, Xueqi had a strong and resolute character. She was not discouraged at all because of her first failure to build her foundation. On the contrary, when she came to the foot of Kari Holy Mountain, the majestic holy mountain between heaven and earth brought her infinite pride. "I want to conquer this holy mountain." At the beginning, at the foot of the mountain, because there were many trees and stone paths for worshippers to walk on, it was not difficult to climb. But when Xueqi climbed to the mountainside, the slope of the hillside suddenly increased. The snow on the hillside made Xueqi step on it, and almost half of her body could not be seen. But this was not the most difficult thing. When Xueqi climbed more than 1,000 meters, there was almost no road on the top of the mountain, and the hillside was so steep that it almost became a vertical angle. If it were an ordinary person, they would have given up at this time. But Xueqi only wanted to reach the top. She climbed up the almost vertical cliff with both hands and feet. Kari Holy Mountain was the tallest of the 4 holy mountains in Tibet. Xueqi was climbing the mountain, which was thousands of meters above sea level. She was surrounded by the biting cold wind. A gust of wind could almost freeze her fingers and make them numb. However, Xueqi seemed to be unaware of it. She still gritted her teeth and climbed up. Her delicate body was almost like a piece of grass on the cliff, as if it would be blown away at any time. Watching Xueqi climb up the mountain range from a distance, Ruan Hongling and Xueqi couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat for her. They didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. Ruan Hongling said nervously in a low voice, "Sister Ziyuan, is she crazy? Why did he have to climb so high? You don't have to climb to the top of the mountain to build your foundation, right?" Ziyuan also looked at Xueqi nervously. She knew that if anything happened to Xueqi, even if she could fly over and save her, Xueqi would never be able to reach the Zhuji phase in this lifetime. Xueqi is challenging the limits of cultivation. Ziyuan murmured in a low voice. She could vaguely feel why Xueqi suddenly wanted to climb to the top of Kari Holy Mountain like a madwoman. What was hidden in this girl's heart that made her want to surpass everything without a care for her own safety? The two of them widened their eyes as they watched Xueqi climb up bit by bit. From a distance, they could only see a small black spot on the snow-white Kari Holy Mountain, constantly climbing and squirming. Although Xueqi had been reborn from Jindan at this time, her strength and aura had surpassed that of ordinary people by several times or even more than 10 times. In front of heaven and earth, she was as small as a speck of dust. But it was such a speck of dust that she wanted to conquer the peak of heaven and earth. Several times, Ruan Hongling thought that Xueqi was going to fall into the valley. Several times, she wanted to rush over to save her, but several times, she found that Xueqi had lost her balance due to the strong wind and turned back. Ziyuan looked at Xueqi with a moved expression. She couldn't imagine how a delicate woman like Xueqi could withstand such a terrible power of heaven and earth in such a cold environment. How could she withstand such a bitter and difficult physical torture? After a long time, when Ruan Hongling saw that Xueqi had finally climbed to the top of the mountain, she finally couldn't help but sigh with a shocked face. "Sister Ziyuan, I have never admired anyone in my life except you. Today, I admire Xueqi. She is really amazing. She can climb such a high mountain with her bare hands when she hasn't reached the Zhuji phase yet." After watching Zhou Qin climb to the top of the mountain, Zi Yuan opened her hands as if she wanted to embrace the sky. She shook her head slightly and said, Zhou Qin must have been stimulated by what happened to Mei Duo. It may be the first time she has felt the pain and grievance of not having power, so she wants to climb to the highest peak and reach the highest realm of cultivation. What we cultivators need is a brave and fearless heart like her. I believe that Zhou Qin will definitely succeed in the Xueqi phase this time. As if to prove Zi Yuan's words, Zhou Qin, who had her arms wide open, suddenly let out an extremely wild roar. It was hard to believe that this noble princess, who usually paid attention to smiling without showing her teeth, could actually let out such a wild roar. This roar shook the heavens and the earth. The clouds in the sky seemed to be shaken and kept spinning, turning into a colorful vortex. In the center of the vortex, a pair of majestic eyes could be vaguely seen. Zi Yuan was shocked and her face changed greatly. Oh no, Zhou Qin has alarmed the gods of the ninth heaven. But just as she was about to move, Zhou Qin, who had not noticed, found a small cave at the top of the mountain to take shelter from the wind. As soon as she sat down cross-legged in it, she immediately entered a meditative state. As soon as Zhou Qin entered a meditative state, the wind and clouds above her head began to rumble, and the sound of thunder could be heard everywhere. Not long after, bolts of lightning struck down one after another towards the top of Xueqi Holy Mountain. But as soon as the lightning fell, a colorful golden wheel appeared on the top of Xueqi Holy Mountain. In this golden wheel, there was a blazing red sun. The golden wheel kept spinning, and the red sun in the middle was like a huge vortex, sucking in one bolt of lightning after another. Ruan Hongling was stunned. She stammered, "What is this?" Zi Yuan said solemnly, "This is the red sun golden wheel of the Tibetan esoteric sect. It is the power of the gods formed by the power of their devout faith of the worshippers who have come to Xueqi Holy Mountain to worship for thousands of years. Now this power is automatically resisting the divine punishment." Ruan Hongling was shocked. Zhou Qin has triggered the divine punishment? Zi Yuan nodded. Zhou Qin's aura is so strong, and she has climbed so high. She even made such a shout. This is simply a provocation to the gods of the ninth heaven. If the heavenly thunder doesn't strike her, do you think God is easy to bully? Ruan Hongling was surprised and laughed at the same time. So Zhou Qin just escaped the tribulation? Zi Yuan also said helplessly, "This may be God's will. I don't know why the gods of Xueqi Holy Mountain want to help Zhou Qin block the divine punishment." Ruan Hongling shook her head and said, "Thunder is the power of heaven and earth. Every bolt of lightning will leak the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. How much spiritual chi of heaven and earth will leak out from the thunder above Zhou Qin's head? However, Zhou Qin's Xueqi phase will not be struck by the heavenly thunder. This is really a great opportunity. How much spiritual chi of heaven and earth can she absorb in the Xueqi phase?" Zi Yuan also sighed. This is called time and fate. If Zhou Qin hadn't insisted on climbing to the top of the mountain, how could she have attracted the heavenly thunder? If she hadn't wanted to climb the highest Xueqi Holy Mountain, how could she have triggered the power of the gods to help her resist the divine punishment? Both of them were silent for a while and sighed in their hearts. After an unknown period of time, the heavenly thunder above Zhou Qin's head gradually stopped, and the clouds hovering in the sky also slowly dissipated unwillingly. But when these clouds were about to dissipate, suddenly there was a dull sound of thunder coming from the top of Xueqi Holy Mountain. A huge shock wave suddenly exploded at the place where Zhou Qin's Xueqi phase was. This ring of qi continued to spread outwards, layer by layer, like waves. Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling looked from afar and saw that there seemed to be a white halo on the top of Xueqi Holy Mountain, which was very beautiful. At this time, Zhou Qin let out a long breath. She stood up from the cave and let out an extremely loud and long roar. This long roar was clear and condensed, like the cry of a phoenix from the ninth heaven. It was completely different from the previous roar. It was as if a sword had finally been tempered and was roaring towards the sky. Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling listened to Zhou Qin's long roar from afar. Their faces were solemn and they didn't say a word. Although they were forerunners on the path of cultivation, they were still shocked by the amazing momentum of Zhou Qin, a latecomer. After Zhou Qin finished the Xueqi phase, she seemed to be unsatisfied. She sat down again and began to subdue Qi Wei and the Vulcan's whip according to the method Li Yundong had taught her. Zhou Qin herself was a Shenin virgin tripod. A good tripod that was 1 in a million. In addition, Jin Dan had refined her body, and there was Li Yundong's Yuanyang Qi in her body. When she was in the Xueqi phase, the Yin and Yang Qi were combined, and the heavenly thunder Qi was being tempered and hammered outside. At this time, she had completed the Xueqi phase. In terms of the power of the Niden after the Xueqi phase, she was no less powerful than the Niden that Li Yundong had refined when he had just reached the Xueqi phase. At this time, she chose to subdue the magical item. It was like a newly victorious army taking advantage of the situation to attack a city. Naturally, she would get twice the result with half the effort. In addition, she had been carrying Qi Wei and the Vulcan's whip along the way. These two magical items had long been contaminated with Zhou Qin's spiritual Qi, so she was quite familiar with them. Not long after, Qi Wei let out a clear cry. This magical item, which had once displayed its divine power in Mount Tianlong, finally glowed with a new vitality. With a whoosh, it flew into the sky and excitedly flew around Carry Holy Mountain a few times. Then, it stopped in front of Zhou Qin with a clang. Its whole body emitted a faint silver light, like a silver crescent moon, making a soft buzzing sound of recognizing its master. The Vulcan's whip in Zhou Qin's hand also jumped violently. In an instant, the Vulcan's whip transformed into the shape of a red python. Its whole body was burning with blazing flames, as if a fire snake had crawled out of hell and was spitting out its ferocious and terrifying snake tongue. Zhou Qin shook her wrist, and the fire snake disappeared in an instant. The Vulcan's whip shook and turned into a blazing red light, wrapping Zhou Qin's whole body in it. After the light disappeared, the Vulcan's whip was tightly wrapped around Zhou Qin's slender waist, like a tight belt, making her look heroic and vigorous. Her whole body seemed to have been reborn, and every pore on her body exuded a sharp spirit. Even though they were far away, Ziyuan could still feel this kind of spirit, which was like a peerless sword, rushing towards her face, as if it could stimulate all the pores on her skin to open up. Ziyuan was horrified and couldn't help sighing. From now on, there will be one more great cultivator in the cultivation world. Chapter 466. Go to Watch Net. After Zhou Qin successfully reached the Xueqi phase, she was about to go down the mountain when she saw a llama with a yellow crown and a red robe standing on the top of the mountain. Beside the llama stood a golden feathered eagle that was as tall as a man. The eagle's eyes were sharp, and it was extremely majestic. Watch Net. 7K. Oath M. Zhou Qin took a closer look and saw that this llama was Dorji Tenzin, whom she had met before. She couldn't help but be stunned and said, "Master Dorji Tenzin? Why are you here?" Dorji Tenzin looked at Zhou Qin with awe and complicated eyes. He put his palms together and bowed, saying, "Zhenren Zhou, I am one of the 18 mountain-protecting divine monks. There is something wrong with Carry Holy Mountain. Naturally, I should come and have a look." Only then did Zhou Qin understand. She smiled apologetically and said, "I'm really sorry. I'm in the Xueqi phase here. I've disturbed the gods of the Holy Mountain and caused you trouble. I will definitely pay you a visit and apologize in the future." Dorji Tenzin shook his head and said, "No, Zhenren Zhou, I'm not here to cause trouble for you. Don't think too much. I'm here to help Master Erdini bring a few words." Because she had had a conflict with Master Erdini before, she frowned slightly and said, "What do you want to say?" Seeing the hostility in Zhou Qin's expression, Dorji Tenzin was not in a hurry to explain. He just said, "Master Erdini asked me to convey 5 sentences and a question to you. The first sentence is, you are Bon de Lam, and Meiduo is not." Even though Zhou Qin had just completed the Xueqi phase and her will was as firm as steel, she was stunned at this time. She widened her eyes and said, What did you say? I am the auspicious goddess? Then what happened to Meiduo?" Dorji Tenzin sighed softly and said, "This is the second sentence that Master Erdini asked me to tell you. He said that Meiduo's body is just contaminated with your Lingqi, so she can turn the Mani wheel." Zhou Qin couldn't help but ask, "But, why did you let Meiduo be this Bon de Lam? Why not me?" Dorji Tenzin added, "Master Erdini asked me to tell you the third thing. He said that if he had told you at that time that you were Bon de Lam and Meiduo wasn't, would you have gone to Padala Palace?" Zhou Qin shook her head without hesitation. "It's impossible unless I die." Dorji Tenzin smiled, as if he was admiring Master Erdini's foresight. He said with a smile, "Master Erdini's fourth sentence said that Bon de Lam is the god of freedom. She would rather die than be restrained, So Master Erdini knows that he can't force you to go to Padala Palace, but he needs someone to be Master Erdini. So he found Maid Duo. Xueqi couldn't help but say angrily, "Then can you sacrifice Maid Duo's freedom and happiness like this? Do you think she's Sangyang Gyatso?" Maid Duo's favorite poem was that of the 6th great Lama of Tibet, Sangyang Gyatso, who was a famous sad poet in Tibetan history. He was originally a 15-year-old boy, but later he was recognized by Songje Gyatso as a reincarnated spirit child. He forcibly separated Sangyang Gyatso from his lover and brought him to Potala Palace. In the end, Sangyang Gyatso died of depression. Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "The 5th sentence that Master Erdini asked me to convey is that the current Bonda Lama is not Songje Gyatso at that time, and Maid Duo is not Sangyang Gyatso. Maid Duo is just a temporary Bonda Lam. She is a devout Buddhist, and she has such an opportunity to meet the real reincarnated Bonda Lam. Therefore, she has the obligation to prevent a great disaster for our esoteric sect. When she completes her mission, she will naturally regain her freedom." Xueqi was slightly shocked and asked, "Can Master Erdini really predict what I want to ask?" Dorji Tenzin laughed and said, "Master Erdini is one of the few eminent monks in our esoteric sect in recent years with great merit and spiritual power. He can predict a lot of things." Xueqi thought for a moment and asked doubtfully, "In that case, can Master Erdini guess what I want to ask next?" Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "Master Erdini also expected it, so he also asked me to convey a question to you. He asked you, does Buddhism have a race?" This question immediately made Xueqi feel awe, because it had asked the question in her heart. In Xueqi's opinion, she was obviously a Han. Why was she the reincarnation of Bonda Lam of the Tibetan esoteric sect? However, Master Erdini's rhetorical question answered Xueqi's doubts. Does Buddhism have a race? Sakyamuni was originally an Indian, but the Buddhism he founded was respected by Buddhists all over the world. The gods and Buddhas in the sky were also different from each other. It was not because of which race believed in which religion, but because the gods of this religion had all evolved from the people of this race. At this time, Xueqi finally believed that this Master Erdini was really a person with great merit and spiritual power. However, there was still a trace of worry in Xueqi's heart. She asked again, "When will this great calamity come? Will Maid Duo be hurt in this great calamity?" Dorji Tenzin put his palms together and said, "Master Erdini wants me to tell you 2 things and ask you to convey them to Zhenren Li." Xueqi was shocked again. "Master Erdini also knows my master?" Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "The master knows everything." Xueqi asked, "What does the master want me to convey?" Dorji Tenzin said, "The master said that when you go to the snow mountain in the future, you must not go east." Xueqi asked in confusion, "What does that mean?" Dorji Tenzin smiled and said, "I don't know. I'm only responsible for conveying it truthfully." Xueqi thought for a moment and nodded. "I'll remember it. What about the 2nd sentence?" Dorji Tenzin said, "The master said that Zhenren Li has only learned half of the mantra Mahamudra, so it's not the real one." Xueqi's expression froze. She knew that Bonda Lam was indirectly reminding Li Jiandong. Although she didn't know why the master wanted to help Li Jiandong, she still said with a solemn face, "I see. Does the master have anything else to say?" Dorji Tenzin shook his head with a smile. "No." At this time, Xueqi couldn't help laughing. "Master, is there finally something unexpected? In fact, I still have questions to ask." Dorji Tenzin chuckled and said, "Everyone can make mistakes. Zhenren Zhou, if you have any questions, just ask them." Xueqi asked in confusion, "How can Master Erdini be sure that I am Bonda Lam? I haven't shaken the prayer wheel. Moreover, since he concluded that I was Bonda Lam, why was he so fierce when I said that I was going to take Maid Duo away?" Dorji Tenzin laughed. He put his palms together and said, "Zhenren Zhou, I once asked the master about this out of curiosity. The master said that shaking the Mani wheel is just a cover-up. The living Buddha has never used this method to choose a reincarnated spirit child. He followed your Lingqi all the way here, but when he saw you, he found that you were a Han, and there was a resolute and unyielding temperament between your eyebrows. In addition, he found that Maid Duo, who was beside you, also had your Lingqi, so he had to take a step back and let Maid Duo replace you. But he didn't expect that you would want to stand up for Maid Duo." If our esoteric sect didn't have Bonda Lam to help us withstand this disaster, our esoteric sect would have suffered an unimaginable blow. Therefore he can tolerate you, the real Bonda Lam, leaving, but he absolutely can't tolerate Mei Duo, the fake Bonda Lam, leaving. Only then did Xueqi understand. She returned the salute and said, I see. I see. Thank you, Master Erdini, for passing on the message. I thank him on behalf of my master. Dorji Tenzin smiled slightly. He patted the big eagle, who was waiting impatiently beside him, and said, Dammer is a little impatient. My words have also been passed on. Zhenren Zhou, see you later. Xueqi smiled and nodded to Dorji Tenzin. Then she looked at Dorji Tenzin and whistled loudly. She jumped down the cliff. Dorji Tenzin moved. The golden-feathered eagle spread its wings and glided down like a bomber, accurately catching Dorji Tenzin's body. After the golden-feathered eagle spread its wings, the length of its wings was an astonishing 5 meters. Although there was a burly adult man sitting on it, the eagle still let out a very relaxed cry, spread its wings, and disappeared into the horizon. After Xueqi watched Dorji Tenzin leave, she looked at the majestic eagle with some envy and thought to herself, it would be great if I had such a big eagle. It would save me a lot of effort wherever I go. Xueqi looked down at the foot of the iceberg, which was like a cliff, and said with a wry smile, It's easy to go up the mountain, but difficult to go down. Although I have succeeded in the Xueqi phase, I can't fly. How can I go down? Just as she was worrying, she heard a familiar voice say with a smile, Do you need a ride? Zhenren Zhou? Xueqi turned her head and saw Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling standing not far away, looking at her with a smile. Xueqi was immediately overjoyed. Zi Yuan, Ruan Hongling? Why are you here? Ruan Hongling said with a smile. We escorted you all the way from the Xueqi phase to here. Why do you think we are here? Xueqi was stunned. Have you been following me? Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said softly. Yes, Li Jiandong was afraid that something would happen to you on the way, so he asked us to protect you all the way. But because we are afraid of affecting your Xueqi phase, as long as you are not maliciously murdered by cultivators, we will not show up. Please forgive us, Zhenren Zhou. Xueqi was moved when she heard this, and a gentle smile appeared on her resolute and handsome face. Master is so worried about meal. Zi Yuan smiled and said, We have been out for almost a month. It's time to go back. Tomorrow is the Taoist Assembly. Zhenren Zhou, are you ready to show your skills at the Taoist Assembly? Xueqi formed a palm with one hand, bowed with a smile and said, Of course. I'm afraid that I will embarrass Master. Zi Yuan smiled and was about to speak when Ruan Hongling couldn't help urging, Let's go back and talk. It's really inappropriate to chat on this iceberg, which is dozens of degrees below zero. The 3 beautiful women looked at each other and laughed in unison. Zi Yuan walked to Xueqi's side, put her hand on her wrist with a smile, and said, Zhenren Zhou, are you ready to go down the mountain? This sentence had a double meaning. Xueqi stood on the Kari Holy Mountain and looked down at the vast earth. She had never dreamed that, as the daughter of an official family, she would one day be able to stand on such a high ground and look down at the common people. At this moment, Xueqi felt an unprecedentedly powerful force flowing in her body. She shouted with great pride. Go down the mountain. Vote recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Raising a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Raising a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Raising a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 467. Go to Watch Network. Just as all the heroes were gearing up for the Taoist Assembly, in Li Yundong's home, Buddhist scriptures were being chanted and smoke was curling up. Many people living in the Riverside district could hear the almost continuous chanting of Buddha when they passed by Li Yundong's house. Sometimes the chanting was the voice of a group of young women, and sometimes it was the voice of a young woman. But without exception, these voices were very pleasant to listen to. Even the chanting of Buddhist scriptures made people involuntarily stop in their tracks and look at Li Yundong's house. Although Li Yundong lived in seclusion with all the members of the Fox Zen school, and Zi Yuan and the others were also very low-key. He, a handsome boy, living with a group of beautiful women, was naturally something that people would talk about. Even if there was nothing wrong, they would still talk about it. His identity and the identity of these beautiful women, as well as the relationship between him and these beautiful women, were one of the most popular topics in the community. Among this group of people, two women with quite extraordinary temperaments were coldly watching these people pointing at Li Yundong's house. One of the women whispered to a beautiful woman beside her, "Shiji Zhou Ping, everyone went to the Taoist assembly today. What are we doing here?" Zhou Ping's attire today was not much different from that of any girl who loved beauty. She was wearing a dark gray windbreaker, which showed off her slender figure. There was a sword hidden in her windbreaker, and her curly hair was coiled behind her head, covering the hilt of the sword that was exposed from the back of her collar with her black hair, which was like a dark cloud falling down. Zhou Ping said with a faint expression, "This is Master's order." Master heard that Li Yundong had borrowed the burning thumb pot from Master Purin, so he asked me to see if he had subdued it. Now it seems that this guy must have failed to subdue the burning thumb pot, and his entire divine sense and soul have been pulled into the burning thumb pot. Although Zhou Ping's Shiji was not as good-looking as Zhou Ping, she looked extremely young, like she was only 15 or 16 years old. Moreover, she had a small oval face, which was quite pleasing to the eye. She asked curiously, "Burning thumb pot? Is it Fa Hai's burning thumb pot?" Zhou Ping looked at her shimmy with a complicated gaze and said, "Yes." The junior sister laughed, revealing two small canine teeth. "Hee. Then this Li Yundong is going to suffer a setback. This burning thumb pot is not an ordinary magical item. The process of subduing it is no less difficult than building one's foundation again." Zhou Ping snorted coldly and said, "Although this madman's cultivation quotient is high, he has only been cultivating for a short time after all. He's a real nouveau riche. In addition, he's greedy, lustful, and has evil intentions. It would be strange if he didn't fall for the burning thumb pot. Master really thinks highly of him, to actually let me pay special attention to him." "Humph." The junior sister giggled and said, "It took Master Haideng 30 days to subdue the burning thumb pot. No matter how powerful he is, I'm afraid he won't be able to get out within 30 days. It seems that this guy won't make it to the Taoist assembly." Zhou Ping sneered and said, "It's best if he doesn't make it. I don't want to see his face. I hate it." The junior sister smiled and said, "That's not good. I specially asked Master to let me go down the mountain just to see the kung fu skills of Li Yundong, who is known as the #1 master of the younger generation in the cultivation world. If he doesn't come, why would I come to watch the Taoist assembly?" Zhou Ping snorted and said, "It's useless even if he comes. There are many masters in this year's Taoist assembly, and the strong people of all sects are eager to win. If he comes, he'll just be a laughingstock and add to the humiliation." The junior sister said with some disappointment, "Is this guy so useless?" Zhou Ping said earnestly, "Junior sister, you think too highly of him. In the past, when Li Yundong fought with others, he relied on his strength to defeat 10 people. That's why he won by luck. Even if he has real ability, compared to the cultivators of our orthodox Xian men who have been cultivating for more than 10 years, he is still far from it. The Taoist assembly is about the magical use of magic, not about whose zhenqi is more powerful or whose strength is greater. There are thousands of Taoist magic, but the most important thing is magic, not strength." The junior sister nodded and said, "Senior sister Zhou Ping, I see. Thank you for your advice. Let's go." Zhou Ping nodded and said, "Let's go. Don't waste time here." Just as they were about to leave, they suddenly heard a commotion coming from not far away. Zhou Ping and the junior sister turned their heads and saw 3 women dressed in different clothes coming from afar. One of the 3 women was dressed in a student's uniform. She was extremely beautiful, and her eyebrows were like ink paintings. Her black hair was tied up in a ponytail, revealing her full and bright forehead. She looked confident and proud. It was Yuan Hongling. Next to her was a woman dressed in white. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall. Every strand of her hair was soft and straight. Just by looking at her back, one would feel that every movement of this woman's hands and feet exuded an ethereal aura. It was truly like walking on the waves with delicate steps and walking on the ground. As soon as Zhou Ping saw the 2 women, she immediately gritted her teeth and sneered, "It's these 2 bitches again." The junior sister looked at Zi Yuan and Yuan Hongling curiously. She asked in a low voice, "Is this Zi Yuan, who used to be known as the top master of the younger generation? She's so beautiful." Zhou Ping sneered and said, Look at her. She looks beautiful and dignified, but in fact, she is a prostitute who has abandoned herself. Otherwise, why would she hang out with a bunch of fox spirits all day long? I feel ashamed for her. The junior sister saw that there was no trace of evil in Ziyuan's body, let alone any obscene aura. In particular, there was an elegant and refined aura between her eyebrows, and her eyes were as clear as spring water in a mountain stream, without a trace of the mortal world. She couldn't help but say, how could such a woman be so unbearable? Shiji, are you sure you're not mistaken? Zhou Ping was furious. She frowned and shouted in a low voice, B****, what do you mean by that? Don't think that just because you're the daughter of third Sherbua, I won't dare to teach you a lesson. Seeing that Zhou Ping was angry, the junior sister quickly smiled apologetically and changed the topic. She pointed to the woman next to her and said, who is this woman? I've never seen a female cultivator who's so energetic. Zhou Ping snorted angrily and looked over. She saw a valiant woman standing next to Ziyuan. This woman was extremely beautiful. Her eyebrows were like sharp swords, and her black eyes were like stars. Her eyes were shining brightly, and when she moved, she looked around with an indescribable sense of coldness and disdain. Zhou Ping was shocked. She couldn't help but whisper, is this Zhou Qin? Has she reached the Zhuji phase? The junior sister asked curiously, Zhou Qin? Who is she? She seems very powerful. Zhou Ping sneered and said disdainfully, how powerful can someone who has just reached the Zhuji phase be? Humph, let's go. The junior sister blinked her eyes and looked at Zhou Qin, muttering to herself, I wonder if Zhou Qin will participate in the Taoist assembly. If she does, I'll have to see how good her kung fu is. The two of them turned to leave. Before they left, Zhou Ping couldn't help looking back at Zhou Qin again. She was a little shocked in her heart. The ancients say that a scholar who has been away for 3 days will be looked at with new eyes. I didn't expect that Zhou Qin would have made such great progress after not seeing her for a few days. It's really scary. No, I have to tell Master immediately. Otherwise, if she grows up, our Zhengyi school will have another big enemy. Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Ruan Hongling walked under the gazes of everyone along the way. Ruan Hongling saw where they lived at first glance and couldn't help laughing. Amitba, we're finally home. We've finally ended the days of not having a hot bath and watching TV. Ziyuan scolded her with a smile. Are you still a cultivator? Are you so greedy for enjoyment? Ruan Hongling made a face and said, you can't say that. Sister Ziyuan, don't you want to take a comfortable hot bath? Ziyuan glanced at Ruan Hongling, but before she could speak, Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. Don't argue. I don't know if Zhenren Ziyuan wants to or not. Anyway, I can't wait. I've lived for so many days, but I've never not taken a hot bath for so many days. I usually wash in lakes and rivers secretly, but it's not comfortable. It's so uncomfortable. After she finished speaking, Ruan Hongling couldn't help clapping her hands and laughing. Ziyuan also couldn't help smiling. The three of them walked downstairs, talking and laughing. Suddenly, they heard the sound of chanting in the house. Ziyuan couldn't help but be stunned. Is this the great compassion mantra? Who's chanting? Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. It seems to be Su Chan's voice. Maybe she's doing something strange again. Ruan Hongling was an impatient person, so she immediately rushed to open the door with the key. As soon as she opened the door, she was shocked. The room was filled with smoke and there was a strong smell of sandalwood everywhere. Su Chan was kneeling in front of a Guanyin shrine, her palms together, and chanting Buddhist scriptures devoutly. Ruan Hongling said in surprise, Su Chan, what are you doing? When did you become a Buddhist? Hearing the voice, Su Chan looked back. After more than 10 days of fear, she suddenly had a place to cry. She couldn't help but shed tears and sobbed, Sister Ziyuan, Sister Zhou Qin, Hongling, Yundong, Yundong. Zhou Qin's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and her face changed drastically. She couldn't help stepping forward and grabbing Su Chan's arm. She asked in a trembling voice, what's wrong with Master? Ziyuan's body also trembled slightly. She asked in a trembling voice, what's wrong with Li Yundong? Su Chan said with tears in her eyes, Yundong has subdued the burning thumb pot and hasn't woken up yet. This is already the 18th day. What? Ziyuan and Ruan Hongling were shocked. Zi Yuan couldn't help stamping her feet and saying, "Alas, it's all my fault for leaving in such a hurry that I didn't tell him. This burning thumb pot is a powerful magical weapon of the eminent monks of past generations. It's extremely difficult to subdue. If his mind is slightly impure, he will fall into the trichiliocosm and be unable to extricate himself. Damn it, damn it." Xueqi had successfully reached the Xueqi phase and returned. She had originally wanted to give Li Yundong a surprise, but she had never expected that she would encounter such bad news after returning. Her face was as white as a sheet as she said, "What should we do now?" Zi Yuan took a deep breath and calmed down slightly. She said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, take me to see him." Su Chan wiped her tears and took Zi Yuan, Xueqi, and Ruan Hongling to Li Yundong's room. Zi Yuan pushed open the door and saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged on the futon like a stone statue. In his palm was the burning thumb pot with brilliant colors. His expression was normal and he was motionless. If Su Chan hadn't told her that Li Yundong had not woken up for 18 days, Zi Yuan would have thought that Li Yundong had just entered meditation. Zi Yuan moved closer to Li Yundong and looked at his condition for a while. Then she turned to Su Chan and said, "Go get the golden needles." Su Chan had been looking at Zi Yuan eagerly, hoping that she would have a solution. At this time, seeing that Zi Yuan had an order, she immediately sighed and quickly went to the room to get the golden needles. At this time, the little foxes in each room also heard the noise and knew that Xueqi had returned from the Xueqi phase. They all came out of their rooms to say hello to Xueqi, then crowded together and looked at Li Yundong with concern. They all wanted to know how Zi Yuan was going to wake him up. Vote recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 468. Go to Watch Net. After a while, Su Chan came over with a small cloth bag and handed it to Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan opened it, took out a 3-inch long golden needle, and pierced it into Li Yundong's Ling Tai acupoint. Go to Watch Net. Li Yundong's body trembled slightly, and then Zi Yuan pierced another needle into Li Yundong's Shenting acupoint. Su Chan watched Zi Yuan's movements nervously. She had followed Ao Wushuang for a long time and knew some medical skills. She knew that Zi Yuan's 2 needles were all important acupoints of the human body. If there was a slight deviation in the needle, it would be life-threatening. Then, Su Chan saw that Zi Yuan was piercing the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of Li Yundong's head again, and she suddenly cried out in shock. The Bai Hui acupoint was one of the fatal acupoints of the human body. Zi Yuan's needle scared Su Chan so much that her legs became a little weak. Su Chan looked at the shining golden needle on the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of Li Yundong's head with a pale face. She couldn't help thinking in fear, "Sister Zi Yuan, why are you piercing the Bai Hui acupoint? If you don't do it well, you'll die." Zi Yuan turned her head to look at Su Chan and explained in a low voice, "Su Chan, don't worry. Now Li Yundong's divine sense is trapped in the burning thumb pot, and the burning thumb pot is now connected to Li Yundong's Xueqi. If you want Li Yundong to wake up, you have to sneak into his body with your own Yin spirit, and then follow his aura into the burning thumb pot. But now Li Yundong's whole body is in a closed state. The Xueqi in his body has been connected to the burning thumb pot, like a self-circulating small universe. It's extremely difficult for things from the outside world to enter. If you want to force your way in, it will only cause Li Yundong's spirit space to collapse, and from then on, he will become a useless person without divine sense. I pierced Li Yundong's Shenting, Ling Tai, and Bai Hui acupoints to break his flawless leakless body. I wanted to create a gap in his leakless body so that my Yin spirit could sneak into his body." After hearing Zi Yuan's explanation, Su Chan suddenly understood. She glanced at Zi Yuan and asked in a low voice, "Sister Zi Yuan, can I go in?" Zi Yuan shook her head and looked at Su Chan helplessly. "Su Chan, you're not a young spirit body. You can't go in." Su Chan's face was full of disappointment. She suddenly thought to herself, "Once upon a time, I was the most powerful person around Li Yundong, but now Zi Yuan's cultivation is far above mine. Xueqi, who didn't know any cultivation before, has reached the Xueqi phase. Her Xueqi is far more powerful than mine. Even Ruan Hongling's cultivation is higher than mine." The little girl looked at Zi Yuan, then at Zhou Qin, and then at Wan Hongling. There was a flash of sadness in her eyes. She couldn't help but secretly regret that she had only cared about playing with Li Yundong in the past, but had refused to work hard to cultivate. Now she had become the one with the lowest cultivation. Thinking of this, Su Chan couldn't help but secretly make up her mind. Even if I can't compare to Sister Zi Yuan, I can't let Zhou Qin catch up and surpass me. I'm not a fool. If I really work hard, can't I be better than others? At this time, Zhou Qin and the others were looking at Zi Yuan and Li Yundong with concern. No one noticed the little girl's thoughts. They saw that after Zi Yuan's 3 golden needles pierced Li Yundong's body, 3 extremely faint white threads slowly emerged from the Bai Hui acupoints on the top of his head, the Shinting acupoints on his forehead, and the Lingtai acupoints on his back. These 3 threads rose straight up and floated straight to the ceiling before spreading out on their own. Zi Yuan sat cross-legged in front of Li Yundong. After a while, she entered a meditative state and the yang spirit went out of her body. After Zi Yuan's yang spirit went out of her body, she said to Zhou Qin and the others with a serious expression, "If I don't come out within 15 minutes, prepare for the funeral of Li Yundong and me. Don't think about saving him, and don't think about saving me." Zhou Qin and the others were shocked when they heard this, and they all got goosebumps at the same time. But before they could dissuade her, Zi Yuan's figure flashed, and the yang spirit quickly rushed toward Li Yundong. When Zi Yuan's yang spirit was about to touch Li Yundong's body, it instantly turned into a yin spirit and turned into countless cyan light spots, drilling into Li Yundong's broken Bai Hui acupoints, Lingtai acupoints, and Shinting acupoints. At this time, the yang spirit in Li Yundong's body had been drawn into the spirit space of the burning thumb pot. So Li Yundong's body was equivalent to an ownerless house at this time. After Zi Yuan came in, she did not encounter any resistance. Zi Yuan felt that there seemed to be a great pulling force in Li Yundong's body, constantly pulling her divine sense, like a whirlpool constantly devouring all the conscious lives around her. Zi Yuan did not resist and quickly followed the qi in Li Yundong's body toward the burning thumb pot. Not long after, she suddenly felt that the dark and boundless world around her suddenly lit up, and she instantly came to a huge and empty world. In this world stood a strangely shaped mountain. Zi Yuan, who was proficient in Buddhist scriptures, knew that this was Mount Meru. Zi Yuan did not stop at all. She quickly flew to the mountainside of Mount Meru. She took a closer look and saw that the figures of Li Yundong and Su Chan were everywhere in the 3,000 worlds around Mount Meru. But Zi Yuan did not know which world Li Yundong's real body was in. Zi Yuan took a deep breath. She knew that 10 years in this spirit space was only equivalent to 1 minute in the outside world, so she patiently searched one world after another. However, there were billions of mortals in the 3,000 worlds. How could it be so easy to find Li Yundong's real body? Zi Yuan's figure was busy shuttling from one spirit space to another. She did this repeatedly for an unknown amount of time. She didn't even know how many spirit spaces she had gone to, nor did she know how many years she had spent here. She only knew that every time she reached a spirit space, she would pinch a mark on her sleeve with her nails. This repeated for many years. When Zi Yuan finally felt a trace of exhaustion and despair, she found that her sleeves were already densely covered with fingernail marks. In some places, her clothes were a little torn because she had pinched them repeatedly. Is it really impossible to find him? Zi Yuan thought in despair as she stood in the vast world of mortals. But if she couldn't find Li Yundong's whereabouts, wouldn't everything she had done before be in vain? Then wouldn't her master's psalm be? Thinking of this, Zi Yuan couldn't help but look confused. This woman, who was usually very assertive, couldn't help but be a little absent-minded. She left a spirit space out of habit and then entered another spirit space in a daze. Zi Yuan, who had searched more than 2,000 spirit spaces in succession, had found nothing. At this time, she was already discouraged. Just as she was thinking about the psalm left by her master, she suddenly found herself in a spirit space with a sea of clouds. In this spirit space, there was an endless sea of clouds everywhere. Above this sea of clouds, there was only one mountain. On the mountain was a lush green pine tree. Under the tallest and largest pine tree, which was like a giant umbrella, sat a white-haired old man. The vast sea of clouds in front of Zi Yuan was so magnificent and beautiful that when she took a look at it, her heart opened up and her previous depression disappeared. Zi Yuan cheered up and flew to the old man under the pine tree. Just as she was about to speak, she saw that the old man was silently staring at the two people who were bending over and busy in a green terraced field not far from the top of the mountain. Zi Yuan followed his gaze curiously and saw Li Yundong and Su Chan at the foot of the mountain. They were dressed like farmers and were busy sowing seeds. Although the two of them were working hard, they laughed and played from time to time, getting their bodies covered with mud. However, their laughter was full of joy. Even from a distance, Zi Yuan could hear Su Chan's bell-like laughter and Li Yundong's cheerful and loud laughter. A warm air blew over her face. Zi Yuan shuttled back and forth between the 3,000 worlds. No matter where she went, Li Yundong and Su Chan lived happily together. She had seen such scenes many times. Zi Yuan turned her face and asked the old man in a clear voice, "Old man, have you ever seen?" Before she could finish her words, the old man's body shook. He suddenly raised his head and said in surprise, "Zi Yuan?" Although the voice was old, it was the first time that Zi Yuan had met someone who could recognize her in this spirit space. She suddenly widened her eyes and carefully looked at the white-haired old man in front of her. She saw that although the old man's hair was so long that it almost reached the ground and his beard was so long that it almost covered his face, Zi Yuan could still vaguely see a trace of familiarity between the old man's eyebrows. She asked tentatively, "Li Yundong?" Li Yundong suddenly stood up and shook off a lot of dust from his body. He stared at Zi Yuan with his eyes wide open and said, "Why are you here?" After traveling through more than 2,000 spirit spaces and spending decades, Zi Yuan finally found Li Yundong's whereabouts. Even though she was calm, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. She grabbed Li Yundong's hands and said loudly, "Thank God, I finally found you." Li Yundong was stunned. "Are you looking for me?" Zi Yuan nodded with a smile on her face and said, "Yes, your divine sense has been tied up in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot for 18 days. I came here specially to find you." Li Yundong exclaimed. His eyes were filled with vicissitudes of life and he said with a sigh, "I remember. I seem to have been here for many, many years." Zi Yuan had finally found Li Yundong after a lot of hardships. She couldn't help but laugh and say, 10 years in the spirit space is equivalent to 1 minute outside. I'm afraid you have been in the spirit space for tens of thousands of years, haven't you? No matter which spirit space you are in, you must be tired of it, right? Is it time to go back now?" Li Yundong took a deep look at Zi Yuan. He smiled slightly, shook his head, and then slowly sat down. He flicked his sleeves and said lightly, "Zi Yuan, you go back." "I won't go back." Zi Yuan was shocked and immediately asked why. Chapter 469. Go to watch net. Li Yundong sat cross-legged under the pine tree, silently watching his other self and Su Chan, who were working in the countryside. His face was full of a quiet and serene smile, as if as long as he looked at them from afar, he would feel satisfied and happy. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong asked slowly, "Zi Yuan, why do you cultivate?" Zi Yuan hadn't expected that Li Yundong would ask her a question. She thought for a moment and said, "To transcend the sufferings of the world and ascend to the immortal realm." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Yes, it's very in line with your cultivation standards. When I first saw you I thought, how could there be such a beautiful woman in this world? Could it be that you are a fairy descending to the world? At that time, I thought that you were a fairy who would ascend to the immortal realm sooner or later, so for you, cultivation is to seek immortality." Zi Yuan listened quietly to Li Yundong's words. Although the old Li Yundong in front of her was no longer as handsome as before, his hoarse and old voice revealed a strong and dignified sense of vicissitudes. Li Yundong looked at Su Chan in the spirit space with gentle eyes and said softly, "But have you ever thought that even if you become an immortal, what can you do? Is it because there is no birth, aging, illness, and death, and you feel happy because you have jumped out of the cycle of life and death? Or do you just want to follow in your master's footsteps and go to the immortal realm to find him?" Zi Yuan's subconscious, which had been hidden in the bottom of her heart for a long time, was pointed out by Li Yundong. Her body stiffened slightly, and she couldn't help saying in her mind, "Yes, I follow in Master's footsteps and even regard his psalm as my golden rule." "Why? Is it just because I want to stay by Master's side and be with him?" But, Master loves Ao Wushuang, not me." Zi Yuan had been by her master's side since she was a child. In her impression, her master was omnipotent. Not only was he the most beautiful man in the world, but he was also the most handsome man in the world. He was also the most amazing man. Because of this, Zi Yuan's life was deeply imprinted with Wang Yuanshan's mark, and these marks were everywhere. Thinking about her past, she vaguely felt that her master Wang Yuanshan seemed to have noticed her feelings, so he left a psalm and told her that Li Yundong in front of her was her lover. It was because of his master's psalm that he had come to this spirit space without hesitation. But, even if the Li Yundong in front of her was really her lover, he loved Su Chan, not her. He cultivated in order to ascend to the immortal realm, to find his master, but to ascend to the immortal realm, he had to save his lover. At the end of the day, he had cultivated for the sake of love. However, neither her master nor her lover loved her. Then what was the purpose of her cultivation? This question made Zi Yuan feel as if she had fallen into the mortal world of the three realms. She was obsessed, possessed, and bewildered. She stood there without saying a word, and her expression kept changing. At this time, Li Yundong's eyes seemed to have seen through the mortal world. He smiled slightly and said, Zi Yuan, you cultivated in order to ascend to the immortal realm. But do you know why I cultivated? At this time, Zi Yuan was in a daze. She could only hear Li Yundong's words, but her mind was in a mess. Seeing that Zi Yuan didn't speak, Li Yundong didn't look back. He continued to say, the purpose of my cultivation was very simple. It was to protect Su Chan from being bullied, and then to protect myself from being bullied. She and I could live happily. Li Yundong pointed to himself and Su Chan at the foot of the mountain. He said with a smile, look, how happy they are now. I have traveled all over the 3,000 spirit spaces to find my true self in the billions of mortal worlds. During this period, I have experienced countless life and death separations and encountered countless strong enemies, just to protect myself and Su Chan in this spirit space from being separated and from being bullied. When I came to this spirit space, I found that there was no one else in this world, only me and Su Chan. Therefore, I chose to stay and sit quietly on the sea of clouds, looking at them. I wanted to see if they would feel tired of this simple life, and if their feelings would fade little by little as they grew older. Li Yundong smiled with emotion. But as a bystander, I watched myself slowly grow old, but they were still happy. You see, didn't I cultivate to see myself and my lover get married? Now that they are living a simple and happy life, what else do I have to think about? Hearing this, Zi Yuan felt melancholy in her heart. She sighed softly and said, but the you down there is not Yum. Li Yundong turned around and asked with a smile, what's the difference? Zi Yuan opened her mouth and wanted to refute, but when she looked at Li Yundong's bottomless black eyes, she couldn't say anything for a moment. She sighed softly and simply sat down cross-legged beside Li Yundong. She said, in that case, I won't go out. I'll stay with you. Li Yundong was slightly stunned. You won't go out? How can that be? Zi Yuan smiled rather sadly. Why can't it work? What's the difference between staying here and going out? Anyway, whether it's my master or's. At this point, Zi Yuan swallowed the rest of her words, and a blush appeared on her beautiful face. Li Yundong said seriously, no, if you can't get out, what do you want Wan Hongling to do? What about the Linggong sect that your master left for you? Do you want to leave Wan Hongling behind and let the other disciples of the Zhengyi school bully your little shimmy? Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She took over Li Yundong's words and asked, you're right, but have you ever thought that if you stay here, you will be satisfied to see yourself and Su Chan in this spirit space? But have you ever thought about what Su Chan, who is waiting for you to go back and fulfill your promise, will do outside this spirit space? When Li Yundong heard this, his body suddenly shook, and his eyes suddenly widened. Seeing this, Zi Yuan immediately struck while the iron was hot and said, even if you think that there is no difference between the Su Chan outside and the Su Chan in front of you, have you ever thought about other people? What about Zhou Qin? She just came back from the Zhuji phase. Do you know that? You led her on the path of cultivation, and then you want to abandon her and leave her alone? My master left me and Hongling behind. You can't do this. Zi Yuan spoke of the sadness and desolation in her heart. Every word was sincere, and every sentence came from the bottom of her heart, which immediately moved Li Yundong. Zi Yuan continued, apart from Su Chan and Zhou Qin, what about those little foxes who have a strong dependence on you? You took them down the mountain, and you don't care about them? Do you know what will happen to them if you don't care about them? Since ancient times, All the foxes who went down the mountain and entered the world ended up in a miserable state. Aren't you harming them by doing this? Can you face your conscience by doing this? Can you live here with peace of mind? When Li Yundong heard this, his expression changed, and he stared at Zi Yuan blankly. After a long time, he finally couldn't help it. He let out a long breath, stood up, flicked his sleeves, and let out a loud laugh. He said in a clear voice, "Buddha, I think I know what my true self is." In this vast world of clouds, a Buddha's name suddenly came. The clouds quickly gathered together and turned into a huge statue of Buddha. The Buddha said majestically, "Amitabha, then what is the true self?" Li Yundong's expression was full of enlightenment and clarity. He said in a sonorous voice, "Ordinary people cling to the 5 skandhas and pretend to be themselves. In fact, that is a false self. If you have the 8 great freedom like Buddha, then you will be the true self." The statue of Buddha in the sea of clouds asked in a booming voice, "Then what are the 8 great freedom?" Li Yundong said in a clear voice, "The 8 great free selves are divided into. First, being able to show one body as many as one body means that one can be small and can change oneself to be as small as a speck of dust. Second, being able to show one's body as big as the boundless world means that one can be big and can change oneself to be as big as the infinite void world. Third, being able to lift one's body far away means that one can change oneself to be as light as a feather. Fourth, being able to live in the infinite world means that one can be free and change one's size at will. Fifth, being able to use all the roots means that you can have a master and freely change into a big person or a small person. Your heart has no superiority or inferiority, and you can subdue and accept everything. Sixth, being able to get all the Dharma means that you can go far away, which means that you can go anywhere you want. Seventh, saying Agatha, going through infinite tribulations means that you can move, which means that you can make the earth tremble 6 or 18 times. Eighth, being everywhere like the void, means that you can make one body as many as you want, and many as you want. You can go straight through the mountain wall, walk on water and fire, walk in the void, turn the 4 directions, turn the earth into water, and turn stone into gold, all at your will. Li Yundong spoke with confidence and assurance. Zi Yuan was slightly shocked when she heard this. She thought to herself, when did Li Yundong study the Dharma so thoroughly? He's amazing. Unexpectedly, Li Yundong seemed to have heard what she was thinking. He turned around and said with a smile, "How do you think I spent my time in the Trichiliacosm? I don't know how many years I've stayed in the Trichiliacosm. I've read almost all the books that can be hidden in the Trichiliacosm and learned almost all the magic that can be read. It's because I've experienced too much in the Trichiliacosm that I'm finally tired. I don't want to leave after staying in this quiet spirit space. If you hadn't come to find me and wake me up, I'm afraid I would have stayed here forever." When Zi Yuan saw that Li Yundong's voice and expression had returned to their previous state, she couldn't help but feel happy. She smiled and was about to reply when she heard the Buddha statue in the sea of clouds say, "Since you know the 8 great beings, why don't you show them to me?" Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said, "What's so difficult about that?" After that, Li Yundong shook his sleeves and shouted, "Small." In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong's figure disappeared in the air. He said, "I exist in every tiny particle of dust in this spirit space." As expected, Zi Yuan heard countless sounds of Li Yundong coming from all directions at the same time. It was as if countless water droplets had gathered into stormy waves and poured into her ears. Even with her high cultivation, she couldn't help but frown and cover her ears. Soon, Li Yundong's figure appeared and he shouted again, "Big!" His figure suddenly grew bigger. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, looked up, but she couldn't even see where his knees were. Compared with Li Yundong, the towering Buddha statue in the sea of clouds suddenly became a tiny speck of dust. Li Yundong quickly returned to his original state and said, "Light." Then his figure floated up lightly. Li Yundong smiled and said to Zi Yuan, "Zi Yuan, blow on me." Zi Yuan curiously blew a mouthful of fragrance at Li Yundong, only to see him floating far away like a feather. Li Yundong laughed and shouted, "It can grow." He stretched out his arm, and one of his arms suddenly became extremely long, as if it could stretch across the sky. Soon he shouted again, "It can be short." The other arm suddenly became extremely short, as if it was missing an arm. Li Yundong quickly displayed the free transformation technique one by one. From an old man to a child, he could change anything with his mind. When Li Yundong showed the 7th free self, he shouted, "It can move." He turned his hands over, as if Buddha had turned over the Five Fingers Mountain. The spirit space in the sea of clouds suddenly shook violently, and the top of the mountain seemed to be shaking to the point that it would collapse at any time. Su Chan and Li Yundong, who were in the spirit space, hugged each other in panic and cried out loudly. Zi Yuan was also a little shaken by the shaking of the sky and earth. She had to fly up and shout, "Don't shake it. If it continues, the spirit space will collapse. Even if the spirit space doesn't collapse, the mountain will." Li Yundong laughed and said, "If the mountain turns into a piece of gold, how can it collapse?" After that, Li Yundong pointed his finger at the mountain peak. In the blink of an eye, the whole mountain turned into a shining golden mountain, and the shaking between heaven and earth suddenly stopped. As a famous person in the cultivation world, although she was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be stunned and dazzled by Li Yundong's magical skills. At this time, Li Yundong said to the Cloud Sea Buddha statue in a clear voice, "How is it? Are the 8 free selves the true selves?" The Cloud Sea Buddha statue laughed and said, "Not bad, not bad. You have traveled through the trichiliocosm and have indeed learned the magic of the 8 free selves. Amazing. It deserves to be the Dharmakaya of the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King. Now, I can rest assured that I will hand over the burning thumb pot to you. With your experience this time and the power of the Dharmakaya of the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, from now on, you can use all the magical items of Buddhism at will without any obstacles." Ha 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 ha. Chapter 470. Go to watch net. After the Cloud Sea Buddha statue laughed loudly, its body suddenly turned into countless clouds and went in all directions. Go to watch net. In the blink of an eye, the mini kiliocosm buzzed and trembled, as if it would collapse at any time. A whirlpool appeared in the sky above the mini kiliocosm. The clouds and everything else in the mini kiliocosm kept flying towards this whirlpool. Li Yundong put his hands behind his back and said to Zi Yuan with a smile, "The spirit space is about to collapse. Zi Yuan, you should leave first." Zi Yuan also knew that the spirit space was about to collapse. If she didn't escape before it collapsed, her young spirit would be completely left in the burning thumb pot, and she wouldn't be able to get out even if she wanted to in the future. She glanced at Li Yundong and couldn't help saying, "What about you? Are you still not leaving?" Li Yundong wiped his face with his hand. In the blink of an eye, he had changed from an old man with a long beard to the handsome young Li Yundong from before. He laughed and said, "Don't worry, I still have to go out and fulfill my promise to Su Chan." Only then did Zi Yuan feel relieved. She quickly flew toward the whirlpool in the sky above her head. The moment she flew into the whirlpool, she couldn't help but stop and look back at Li Yundong. She saw that the man's figure was calm and composed in the world that was about to collapse. His expression seemed to have seen through everything, grasped everything, and controlled everything. Even if the world were to be destroyed in the next second, he would have the ability to turn the tide. At this moment, Zi Yuan couldn't help but compare the figure of Wang Yuanshan in the depths of her memory with the figure of the man in front of her, who had finally shed his immaturity and began to show the bearing of a great cultivator. In front of Zi Yuan's eyes, the two figures gradually overlapped, and it was no longer possible to distinguish them from each other, and there was no difference between them. At this moment, Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She didn't dare to look at him anymore, for fear that if she looked at him again, she would be reluctant to leave like Li Yundong before. Li Yundong, remember, Su Chan is waiting for you. Zi Yuan shouted one last time. She closed her eyes, turned around, and flew into the whirlpool. He looked at himself and Su Chan in the spirit space, hugging each other tightly and leaning against each other. In the end, the two of them, like the countless clouds in the spirit space, flew into the whirlpool and disappeared. He sighed softly and said, "It's time to wake up from the dream. My Chan-er is waiting for me to go back. These fake me will disappear, but Chan-er and I will never disappear. She and I will be together forever." As soon as Zi Yuan returned from the spirit space of the burning thumb pot, thousands of young spirit divine senses finally escaped from the 3 Ling Tai, Bai Hui, and Shin Ting acupoints of Li Yunyang that had been opened. Her young spirit instantly gathered together and returned to her body. As soon as she opened her eyes, she heard Su Chan and the little foxes cheering ecstatically. A little fox shouted excitedly, 14 minutes and 59 seconds. It was so close, so close. Although Zhou Qin had experienced countless dangers along the way to the Zhuji phase, she couldn't help but be shocked at this moment. She pressed her hand to her chest, shook her head and smiled. Ziyuan, you were so dangerous. You really scared us to death. Just now, when I saw that the time was about 14 minutes and 50 seconds, I was in despair. Guan Hongling also hugged Ziyuan tightly and said with tears and laughter, Shiji Ziyuan, you scared me to death just now. I thought you wouldn't come back. If you're not here, what's the point of me living? Ziyuan smiled softly. She gently stroked Guan Hongling's back and said softly, Don't be silly. I'm back now, aren't I? Zhou Qin saw that although Ziyuan had woken up, Li Yundong was still sitting cross-legged on the spot, motionless. She couldn't help but ask doubtfully, Ziyuan, where's my master? How is he? Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong with a complicated expression and said, He will wake up in a while. Su Chan looked at Ziyuan nervously. Is Yundong all right? Ziyuan also looked at Su Chan and sighed in her heart. You don't know that Li Yundong almost couldn't come back because of you. But in the end, Ziyuan didn't say this out loud. She smiled slightly and comforted her. He's fine. Not only is he fine, but he has also comprehended the great Buddhist Dharma. He is now a complete master of both Buddhist and Taoist cultivation. He has the bearing and posture of a great cultivator. He can't be compared to before. Su Chan blinked her eyes in confusion. How can one comprehend the great Buddhist Dharma after subduing the burning thumb pot? As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly saw Ling Yu pointing at Li Yundong and exclaiming, Look, look! Everyone looked at Li Yundong and couldn't help but be stunned. They saw that the 3 golden needles on Li Yundong's body were constantly trembling and being pushed out little by an invisible force. Finally, this force pushed the golden needles out of Li Yundong's body and gently fell to the ground with a ding. Soon, the burning thumb pot in Li Yundong's hands jumped up into the air, and its whole body bloomed with colorful light. The crystal-clear glass burning thumb pot became colorful, as if countless ribbons were surrounding it. On each ribbon, there were countless Vajras practicing magic and countless Arhats chanting sutras. These ribbons quickly drilled into Li Yundong's body, and then the Bai Hui acupoint on the top of his head suddenly opened. White steam rose from the top of his head, echoing the colorful ribbons released by the burning thumb pot and entwining tightly. Everyone else in the room was dumbfounded. All of them held their breaths and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. These lights entangled together like countless tree vines, quickly forming Vajras in different postures. Then, these Vajras quickly rushed into Li Yundong's body. Every time a Vajra rushed into his body, the light outside quickly formed another Vajra. This repeated. After Su Chan and the others silently counted for a while, they found that there were a total of 18 Vajras. Soon, the light formed another 108 Arhats and rushed into Li Yundong's body. When the 108 Arhats all rushed in, the lingering light finally gathered into a ball and quickly drilled into the space between Li Yundong's eyebrows. As soon as it drilled in, a twisting colorful light gathered between Li Yundong's eyebrows. The colorful light gathered together and kept squirming, twisting, and slowly turning into a vertical pupil. Before Li Yundong opened his eyes, the vertical pupil slowly opened by itself, emitting an awe-inspiring white divine light. Wherever it looked, the pressure was so heavy that it made people's hearts beat faster and they felt a sense of worship. Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the little foxes were dumbfounded. Guan Hongling was also dumbfounded. Only Ziyuan was slightly surprised and whispered, Sure enough. Su Chan's ears were sharp, and she immediately asked in a low voice, Sister Ziyuan, what did you say? Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong and said with awe, previously, in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot, the divine senses left by the eminent monks of past generations said that Li Yundong is the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king. Now it seems that it's true. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong in shock. She thought to herself, Master Erdini said that I'm the reincarnation of the auspicious goddess, but Li Yundong is the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king. If he and I are both reincarnations of gods, will there be others who are reincarnations of gods? Why are there so many reincarnations of gods? Is it to deal with a legendary catastrophe? At this time, Su Chan also exclaimed in a low voice. No wonder when he was visualizing in the past, the god he visualized turned out to be the immovable wisdom king of Buddhism. I was wondering how the Taoist magic he practiced could possibly visualize the god of Buddhism. It turns out that he is the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king. The little foxes were also amazed and whispered to each other, It turns out that our leader is the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King? That's amazing. We have such a strong leader. Haha, let's see who dares to bully us now. Our leader is the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King. That's right. The immovable Wisdom King is the king of all Wisdom Kings and the head of the 5 great Wisdom Kings. He can subdue all demons. Except for Buddha. He is the most powerful one in the world. The little foxes were talking excitedly in low voices, but suddenly, Ling Yu stretched out her head and said, "But, aren't we fox spirits? Could it be that our leader, the immovable Wisdom King, has subdued us in the end?" These words made the little foxes shrink their heads one by one and look at Li Yundong with fear in their eyes. Su Chan's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. She thought to herself, yes, if Li Yundong is really the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, I'm a fox spirit. Humans and demons are already at odds with each other, but Buddhas and demons are irreconcilable enemies. What should I do in the future? Yundong must already know that I'm the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King. Will he despise me, a demon? As the little girl thought about it, she couldn't help but feel sad in her heart. Her eyes turned red and she couldn't help crying. She couldn't wait to throw herself into Li Yundong's arms and ask him what was going on. Just as the little girl was letting her imagination run wild, the vertical pupil on Li Yundong's forehead finally closed slowly, and then the dazzling brilliance slowly stretched into a straight line and disappeared in an instant. When the vertical pupil disappeared, the burning thumb pot in Li Yundong's hand also slowly fell. As soon as it fell into Li Yundong's palm, his body trembled slightly. He hissed and took a deep breath. Everyone felt as if a divine dragon had sucked all the air in the room, and everything around him seemed to be sucked away by Li Yundong. Then, after Li Yundong finished inhaling, he let out a long breath. At this moment, everyone suddenly felt that there was a strong wind in the room, as if they were going to be blown away in the next second. Xueqi stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. She had thought that the speed at which she had reached the Xueqi phase was already extremely amazing. At that time, Li Yundong had taken almost twice as long as her, so she should be able to catch up with him. But now it seemed that Li Yundong had reached a realm that she couldn't even reach. She didn't even know how high this realm was. After Li Yundong took a deep breath, he slowly opened his eyes. At this moment, everyone felt that Li Yundong's eyes were like the deep sea, vast and bottomless. If they looked at it for too long, they would be sucked in by his eyes. After Li Yundong opened his eyes, he looked at the crowd, smiled slightly, and said, "How long have I been in meditation?" At this time, none of the women in the room dared to speak. Only Xueqi boldly said, "Master, you have been in meditation for 18 days. Li Yundong glanced at Xueqi with admiration in his eyes. "You have succeeded in the Xueqi phase. Ah, you have also subdued the powerful magical weapon. Congratulations. Welcome to the world of cultivators." Li Yundong saw that Xueqi was covered in dust. It was obvious that she had been guarding him nervously since she came back. She didn't even have time to take a bath. He smiled and said, "Hurry up and take a bath. Don't stay here." "I'm fine." Only then did Xueqi blush. She felt that if she stayed for another second, Li Yundong would dislike her for being sloppy. She quickly turned around and ran out of the room. Li Yundong's gaze shifted to Wan Hongling again. He nodded to her and said with a smile, "Hongling, thank you for escorting Xueqi all the way. I will remember your kindness. I will definitely return it in the future." Wan Hongling put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "I don't need you to return the favor. I'm happy to help. It's none of your business. If you really want to return the favor, then pay me more for my labor. I've been rushing all the way here, and my clothes are all dirty." After saying that, she sniffed herself, frowned, and said angrily, "There's even a smell." Li Yundong laughed and said, "That's still better than the smell of a stinky man." Wan Hongling made a face at Li Yundong. "You're good at talking. I'm going to take a bath." Li Yundong watched Wan Hongling leave with a smile, and then his eyes fell on Zi Yuan. He said with a smile, "Zi Yuan, you are the one I should thank the most." Zi Yuan was looking at the boy who had been reborn in front of her with a complicated gaze. Although she felt that his appearance had not changed, there was something in his bones that had changed dramatically. It seemed that a guru of a generation had already begun to show signs of being a guru. When Zi Yuan heard Li Yundong say this to her, she didn't know why, but her cheeks suddenly turned red and she said in a panic, "You should thank Xueqi. For you, she chanted Buddhist scriptures day and night, begging Buddha to bless you. She didn't stop for 18 days. You should thank her." After that, Zi Yuan turned her head and fled the room in a panic. Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan's departing figure with a little confusion. He shook his head and then looked at Xueqi again. As soon as he saw Xueqi looking at him eagerly, Li Yundong's eyes suddenly became extremely gentle. At this time, Xueqi saw Li Yundong looking at her. She couldn't help but think nervously, "Ah, Yundong is looking at me. He is the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king, and I am a fox spirit. Buddhism and demons can't coexist. Will he dislike me? Would he subdue a demon like me, a vixen?" Chapter 471. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong looked at the little girl looking at him with a pitiful look in her eyes. She stood where she was, not daring to go forward. If it had been any other time, she would have cried out and thrown herself into his arms when there was no one around. 7K. Oath M. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Choner, what's wrong?" When Xueqi heard Li Yundong call her so intimately, her body couldn't help but tremble slightly, and there was a trace of eagerness in her eyes. She took 2 steps forward, but when she was only a hand away from Li Yundong, she couldn't help but stop. She looked at Li Yundong hesitantly and said softly, "Are you the immovable wisdom king, or my Yundong?" Only then did Li Yundong understand the worries and concerns in the little girl's heart. He couldn't help but feel his heart soften. He stretched out his arm and held the little girl's soft waist in his arms. Li Yundong intimately pinched the little girl's nose and said softly, "Silly, what are you thinking about?" The little girl greedily sniffed Li Yundong's familiar masculine scent. She felt slightly relieved and thought to herself, "My Yundong is still so intimate with me. Am I overthinking it?" Xueqi pouted and made a face at Li Yundong. She said with a wronged expression, "Don't you know that Buddha and demons can't coexist? You're the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king. What if one day you reform a little demon like me?" Li Yundong laughed, kissed the girl's face, and said affectionately, "You little fool, I didn't know in my previous life, but I know one thing in this life. I am an ordinary person, and you are a little demon. An ordinary person like you, a little demon. Do you like me?" Xueqi raised her head and rolled her eyes. Suddenly, she smiled mischievously and said, "It sounds nice, but I have to hear your true feelings." As she said this, the little girl pressed her face against Li Yundong's chest and said coyly, "Tell me. If you lie, I can tell." Li Yundong chuckled. He lowered his head gently and looked at the little girl in front of him with infatuation. He said softly, "Little girl, do you know what I've been doing in the 3,000 small worlds of the burning thumb pot these days?" Xueqi tilted her head and blinked. "What did you do?" He caressed the little girl's cheek and said softly, "I went from one spirit space to another to find my true self, but no matter which spirit space I was in, I found that you and I could live happily together. In the end, I chose a world where there was no one except for the grandpa and the chick. Then, I quietly watched the two of them live a happy life. Year after year, day after day, the old man and the little girl didn't feel tired at all, and I didn't feel monotonous at all. On the contrary, when I saw them so happy, I thought of the hard times we had gone through together, and my heart was filled with sweetness and happiness." As he said this, Li Yundong held Xueqi's soft hand in his palm and said with a smile, "Even if all the gods and Buddhas oppose me, I won't leave you. You little devil, will you leave me?" Xueqi was very moved when she heard this, and her eyes were sparkling. She looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes and suddenly smiled, but tears rolled down her cheeks. She said in a daze, "I won't leave you, unless you dislike me one day and don't want me any more. Even if you want to purify your little lass someday, little lass will willingly let you do it." Li Yundong laughed and held the little girl tightly in his arms. As if coaxing a child, he said, "Silly, do I need to wait for a day to purify you? I'm going to purify you right now." After that, he bared his fangs and brandished his claws at Xueqi's chest. Xueqi laughed and covered her chest tightly with both hands. She giggled and said, "You're so annoying. You were so solemn just now, but now you've become so obscene. You're so annoying." With a straight face, Li Yundong said in a serious and righteous manner, "Nonsense, I'm still as dignified as before." This is a major event in the world for the sake of carrying on the family line. How can I be obscene and upper class? Don't tell me that all the upper-class people in this world don't do such despicable things? Su-chan covered her chest with one hand, and the slender fingers of the other reached out to scratch Li Yundong's face. She giggled and said, "You're so thick-skinned. Aren't you ashamed?" Li Yundong smiled and suddenly opened his mouth. He put the little girl's slender fingers into his mouth like a bird, and then gently pecked the tip of the little girl's fingers with the tip of his tongue. The trace of warmth made the little girl tremble all over. She exclaimed and subconsciously wanted to retract her hand, but as soon as her hand moved, she held back, as if she couldn't bear to pull it back. Su-chan's cheeks were red, and her pretty face was buried in Li Yundong's arms. It seemed that she was shy and wanted to hide from something, but she turned her face sideways and opened one eye wide. She quietly looked at Li Yundong's face through a gap, and the corners of her eyes were full of seductive charm and shyness. Li Yundong was aroused by the little girl's natural charm. His lower body was as hard as a diamond, and he pressed it against the little girl. Su-chan let out a cry and quickly realized what it was. Her whole body became hot and soft, as if she was about to turn into a pool of spring water and melt into Li Yundong's arms. Her small cherry mouth was slightly open, facing Li Yundong's small tent. She stared at the male object and thought in her heart, "Yundong has been with me for so long, but he has never tasted real happiness. Is it too unfair for him?" Thinking of her shyness, the little girl's body became hotter and hotter, and the roots of her ears seemed to be dripping blood. However, the spring water at the corners of her eyes became more and more rippling. She boldly raised her head, her eyes like silk, and her breath like orchids. She said in a soft voice, "Big Monk, I'll go and get rid of the fire for you, okay?" The fox demon was originally the most young in the world, and Su-chan was one of the best among the fox demons with charming bones. Even Buddha Tathagata would fall off the lotus throne with this delicate cry, let alone Li Yundong, who had long fallen in love with Su-chan. Li Yundong suddenly felt a raging fire go straight to the top of his head. His hand holding the little girl suddenly exerted force, wanting to hold Su-chan's body. But as soon as he thought of this, he suddenly heard Xueqi shouting outside, "Master, we are all ready. We can go to the Taoist assembly. We are all waiting for you." This cry made the raging fire on Li Yundong's body disappear completely. His eyes suddenly became clear, and his arm, which had been hard and fierce, also became soft and relaxed. He pinched the little girl's nose and said with a smile, "Little devil, do you want to destroy my true god Dharmakaya or my Yuanyang body? Aren't you afraid that your master will really enlighten you?" Su-chan twisted her soft body and said in a sweet voice, "I don't know. I only know that I want to make my master happy. As for the rest..." As she said this, the little girl got into Li Yundong's arms and said shyly, "I don't care about the rest." Li Yundong knew that Su-chan loved him so much that she didn't want to care about anything else. She just wanted to enjoy the most beautiful and happy things in the world with him. But he also knew that this was also caused by a strong sense of oppression and insecurity in Su-chan's subconscious. In the little girl's opinion, it seemed that this was all he could bring to her. She would rather be a three-tailed fox demon for the rest of her life than lose his love. Li Yundong was moved in his heart, but he also smiled bitterly. He didn't see through the little girl's thoughts, but just picked her up dotingly, rubbed the tip of her nose with the tip of his nose, and said intimately, "Well, even if you want to be happy, you have to wait until after the Taoist assembly, don't you? If your master's Dharmakaya and Yuanyang body are destroyed now, do you want your master to make a fool of himself at the Taoist assembly?" Su-chan lowered her head. She was a little unhappy and said shyly, "But, are we going to be like this for the rest of our lives? What if my cultivation can never catch up with yours?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Do you think your master wants to be a widow? In fact, I've already thought of this. In the 3,000 small worlds, I've read countless classics and found that as long as a cultivator cultivates to the Jinshin phase, he can defend his Yuanyang. No matter if you are a peerless celestial fox or a peerless demoness, you can't take away my Yuanyang body, let alone destroy my true god Dharmakaya. Think about it, there is a kung fu called the Vajra indestructible body, which is equivalent to the Taoist Jinshin phase." Su-chan's eyes lit up. She suddenly raised her head and said happily, "Yes, the seventh heaven of cultivators is the Jinshin phase. The highest realm of the Jinshin phase is the invincible, immortal, and indestructible. When you reach this realm then..." Li Yundong laughed, pointed at Xueqi, and deliberately teased her. Look at you. When it comes to this matter, you get excited. You've become smart. You little devil, what's in your head? Xueqi was very shy and twisted in Li Yundong's arms. She said angrily, You're so annoying. You're the most anxious about this kind of thing. I just... As the little girl spoke, she saw Li Yundong looking at her with a smile. His clear and penetrating eyes seemed to see through all her thoughts. Suddenly, she couldn't continue her words. Xueqi blushed and simply let go of her face. She said with a blushing face, Well, I just want to, so what? Is it wrong to want to have fun with my master? Li Yundong laughed and said, Silly girl, when I reach the Jinshin phase, even if my primordial essence leaks out, it won't break my Yuanyang body. At that time, not only can you obtain my Yuanyang Zhenqi, but you can also have real dual cultivation with me. Xueqi was fascinated by his words. For a moment, she couldn't help opening and closing her nose. Her eyes were like silk, and her whole body seemed to be on fire. She couldn't wait to immediately fly with her master. Seeing this, Li Yundong stretched out his hand and slapped the little girl's round and fleshy buttocks. He said with a smile, Well, get up quickly. The people outside are going to laugh at us. Xueqi jumped up with a cry, covering her buttocks. When she got up, she couldn't help turning her head and suddenly asked with a worried expression, But, when can you cultivate to the Jinshin phase? I heard that if the cultivators in the world want to rely on the power of their own Niden to cultivate to the realm of the immortal golden body, it is impossible. They must take the Dun Jindan, otherwise they can't cultivate to the realm of the immortal golden body. Li Yundong said with a smile, Of course I know this, but I've discussed it with Zi Yuan before. The betrothal gift of the Taoist assembly is very likely to be a peerless powerful magical weapon like the Medicine King tripod. If it's such a powerful magical weapon, then I will risk my life to snatch the Medicine King tripod. When the time comes, we will refine elixirs and eat them. We will refine a furnace of Renyuan Jindan and give one to everyone. We will refine 30 Dun Jindan and each person will eat one and throw one away. Ha ha ha. Xueqi couldn't help but giggle and say, Do you think these 3 elixirs are Lu Wei Di Huang pills? Li Yundong also laughed. He held Xueqi in his arms and said, Well, you have to believe in me. I am the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king. The Jinshin phase is a piece of cake for him. Xueqi nodded her head vigorously and answered obediently, Yes, my master is very powerful. In the future, you must protect your girl. Li Yundong laughed and rubbed the girl's hair with one hand. You used to protect me, but now it's my turn to protect you. Don't worry, there will be no problem. If someone bullies you in the future, no matter if he is Buddha or Guanyin Bodhisattva, I will help you beat him up. The two of them looked at each other and giggled for a while, then went out hand in hand. Li Yundong went out the door and saw that Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Ruan Hongling, and the little foxes were already in the living room. When they saw him coming out, they all stood up and looked at him in unison. Zhou Qin asked excitedly, Master, can we go to the Taoist assembly? Li Yundong smiled and waved his hand. Of course, let's go. Vote for recommendation, previous page, return to table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 472. Go to Watch Net. On the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, Dongwu City. Go to Watch Net. The 3 foreigners, Chris, John and Alba, followed Li Yunyang's footsteps all the way to Dongwu City. They knew that the Taoist assembly would not begin until the next day, so they first found a hotel to stay in and had a good night's sleep. On the 8th day of the 12th lunar month, the 3 of them left early, walked along the ancient canal of Dongwu City, and walked to the Xueqi pier. Along the way, the 3 of them kept taking pictures with their cameras and mobile phones in their hands, marveling at the beautiful scenery of this ancient city that had existed for thousands of years. While taking pictures with her mobile phone, Alba sighed sincerely, It's so beautiful. This city is really great. I didn't expect that there would be such a beautiful city in China. John also nodded and praised. I've been to Tiannan City before. In my impression, Tiannan City is a developed modern city. The process of urbanization is very fast, but it feels no different from the cities in our country. As long as the people inside are Americans, you can't tell whether it's a city in China or an American city. But Dongwu City is different. This city has a strong Oriental flavor, which makes me feel like I've returned to ancient China. Since Chris had been teased by her grandmother when she returned to the United States last time, she had put in a lot of hard work and began to study all aspects of China's culture, history, and customs. She smiled slightly and acted as a temporary tour guide. She said with a smile, Dongwu City is full of treasures and has an outstanding people. Since 514 AD, King Fuchai of Wu has built this city here. Since then, this city has been a famous cultural, economic, and political city of this country. 3 foreigners with deep eyes and high noses walked slowly along the willow embankment of the moat of Dongwu City. John and Alba listened carefully as Chris introduced this famous historical city in China. Chris had an outstanding appearance and a tall figure. She walked along the embankment and talked with assurance, attracting the attention of many people. She said in a clear voice, Dongwu City has been very prosperous and developed since ancient times, so it is known as a paradise on earth. Also, because Dongwu City has always been famous for its beautiful scenery and elegant gardens, it has the reputation of being the best garden in the world and the best garden in Dongwu City. Chris pointed to the bridge that spanned the moat, as well as the arch bridges that could be seen everywhere on the side of the road, and said, in the 13th century, Marco Polo came here. Because he saw the small bridges and flowing water here. He praised Dongwu City as the Venice of the East in his travels. Alba smiled and exclaimed, I've been to Venice. It's also a very beautiful city. The style there is completely different from here, but it's hard to tell which one is better. The 3 of them chatted and laughed as they walked along the moat for a while. After walking for about 2 kilometers, they finally arrived near the pier of Xinshe Bridge. As soon as they arrived, the 3 of them saw that the pier was surrounded by all kinds of luxury clubs and entertainment venues. It didn't look like a place where cultivators would hold a party at all. Alba looked around and couldn't help but ask curiously, is the so-called Taoist assembly being held here? Is it being held in a dance bar? Hardadef also looked left and right in confusion. He couldn't help but ask curiously, didn't that man say it was on an oil tanker last time? How can there be a luxury cruise ship here? Chris couldn't help but smile bitterly. Hardadef, don't joke around. Look carefully. This is a moat. Where can a luxury cruise ship come from? Do you think an oil tanker like the Titanic can enter this kind of moat? Oh please, the Titanic can block this river. Hardadef glanced around and suddenly saw a medium-sized cruise ship moored near the pier of Xinshe Bridge. The cruise ship was divided into 2 floors. There was a large balcony on the upper floor, which was obviously for tourists to enjoy the scenery by the river. Below it was a closed cabin that could accommodate about 300 or 400 people. Hardadef pointed at the oil tanker and asked curiously, Hey, is this the one? Chris and Alba looked at it together and nodded in unison. It's possible. Let's go and ask. The 3 of them quickly stepped forward. Just as they were about to pass through the pier, they suddenly saw 2 people dressed like tourists approach them. One was fat and the other was thin. The 2 of them glanced up and down at them, then blocked their way. Seeing this, Chris immediately said in fluent Chinese, Hello, may I ask if the Taoist assembly is being held here? The 2 of them were stunned. They looked at each other and asked in surprise at the same time, Who are you? How do you know about the Taoist assembly? Hardadef quickly leaned over and said cheekily, We aren't. Chris was afraid that he would act first and report later, so she quickly stamped on his foot with the heel of her high heels. Hardadef felt the pain, and his facial features twisted together. Chris pulled Hardadef, who wanted to cry but had no tears, behind her and said with a smile, I'm Chris, an intern reporter from the Philadelphia Daily, and these 2 are my colleagues. We heard that today is the day of the ancient Taoist assembly of China, so we wanted to interview you. I wonder. Before she could finish her words, the 2 of them said impatiently, What Taoist assembly? I don't know. Let's go. This place is closed today. Didn't you see the sign? As he spoke, he pointed to the closed sign hanging at the ticket office next to him. Chris was stunned and was about to say something, but the 2 of them waved their arms and drove them out. Just then, a luxurious Mercedes-Benz limousine stopped beside the road at the pier, and a few men and women in suits and leather shoes got out of the car. As soon as the 2 of them saw these people, They were immediately stunned. They went up to them with smiles on their faces, cupped their hands, and said, "May I ask which sect you are from?" The leader was a man with a square face and sword-like eyebrows. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Du Fei from the Chuanjian Dragon sect." The two people who were welcoming the guests smiled and cupped their hands. It turns out to be Zhenren Du, the jade-faced golden monkey. "It's an honor to meet you." Du Fei then introduced a short man next to him and said, "This is my youngest shitty, Yu Shang, who is known as the Three-Eyed Erlang." The fatter of the two exclaimed and said with a solemn face, "It turns out that Zhenren Three-Eyed has arrived. Sorry for my disrespect." Yu Shang was not tall, but he was extremely arrogant. He looked at the two of them proudly, snorted, and then turned his nostrils to the sky, no longer looking at them. The two of them seemed to know Yu Shang's temper, so they didn't care about it and just smiled. Du Fei then introduced a woman in a professional suit beside him. He smiled and said, "This is my shimmy, Wei Qing." Wei Qing had light makeup on her face. She smiled sweetly and said, "I'm not a famous cultivator. I'm just here to join in the fun with Xixiang. I don't have a nickname. You can just call me Wei Qing." The two of them saw that Wei Qing was young and beautiful, had a pleasant smile, and was approachable. She was not as arrogant as Yu Shang. They both laughed and said, "Well said, well said." Wei Qing approached the two of them and asked curiously, "Hey, are all the other sects here?" The thinner of the two said with a smile, "The Yinyang sect of Mount Wuhua has arrived, and so has the Qingwei sect. There are also people from the Donghua sect, the Donghai sect, the Penglai sect, the Jinshan sect, the Loguan Taoist sect, the Qingshui sect, and other sections." Hearing this, Yu Xing snorted coldly and sneered in a low voice, "They're all a group of nobodies." The two of them glanced at Yu Shang and felt angry in their hearts. It turns out that only the Chuanjian Dragon sect is a big sect in the world, and only Yu Shang, are famous cultivators. Are the others not worth mentioning? Wei Qing, who was standing to one side, saw that the atmosphere was awkward. She rolled her eyes and quickly tried to smooth things over. She said with a smile, "Oh, there are so many people here. It's so lively. I thought we arrived early. I wonder if Zhenren Li has arrived?" The two people in charge of welcoming the guests looked at each other in confusion. "Zhenren Li? Which Zhenren Li? Which sect is he from?" At this time, Yu Shang couldn't help snorting coldly again. Who in the world is surnamed Li worthy of being called Zhenren Li? The two people in charge of welcoming the guests were both inner disciples of the Gazao sect of external alchemy. Their strength was extraordinary, so they had been sent to welcome the guests. Otherwise, if the cultivators of other sects saw them, they would think to themselves, "It turns out that the cultivators of the Gazao sect are so weak." However, the two of them had not expected that even with their cultivation quotients, not only were they not qualified in Yu Shang's eyes, but also all the cultivators surnamed Li in the world. His arrogance was boundless. The most annoying thing was that both of them had the surname Li. This sentence was like a slap to the faces of both of them. The fatter one suppressed his anger and said, "I haven't asked Zhenren Yu yet. Who in the world is surnamed Li worthy of being called Zhenren Li?" Wei Qing saw that the two of them looked unfriendly and were about to lose their temper. She quickly said with a smile, "Oh, of course it's Li Yundong. It's my fault for not asking clearly. It's Li Yundong." When the two people of the Gazao sect of external alchemy heard this, their expressions immediately changed. The fatter one asked seriously, "Is it Li Yundong, the one who took over as the leader of the Fox Zen school from Mount Tianlong?" The thinner one asked, "Is it Li Yundong who made a scene on Mount Gazao of our ancestral court?" When Wei Qing heard this, she complained in her heart, "Oh no, how could I forget that Li Yundong has a grudge against the Gazao sect? You're really touching on my sore spot." Wei Qing laughed dryly and said, "It seems to be this Li Yundong. Ah ha ha." The two of them snorted coldly. The fatter one sneered and said, "It turns out to be Zhenren Li. I was wondering who it was that caught Zhenren Yu's attention. I heard that Zhenren Yu and Zhenren Li seemed to have had a fight last time and suffered a small loss, right? No wonder he can't forget Zhenren Li." The thinner one also sneered and said, "It's fine if he doesn't come. If he does, we have to let him have a good taste of the power of our external alchemy. Otherwise, will he really think that there is no one in our Gazao sect?" Yu Sheng glanced at the two of them and sneered secretly. Just as he was about to speak, He suddenly heard a clear voice coming from afar. It had a strong Sichuan accent and was laughing. Who is so bold as to look down on the Gazao sect of external alchemy? Don't you know that a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake? They looked in the direction of the voice and saw 3 young men in Taoist robes walking over slowly. The young man in the lead was tall, handsome, and had an extraordinary temperament. He carried a long sword wrapped in grey cloth on his back, looking inconspicuous. The fatter one cupped one hand in the other before his chest and asked, "May I ask who you are?" The young man in the lead made a palm with one hand, bowed, and said with a smile, "I'm Zhang Xueqi from the Qingyang Palace in Chengdu, Sichuan." When everyone heard this, they were shocked. They all looked at Zhang Xueqi and thought, is this the future leader of the Qingqing sect, Zhang Xueqi, who had said that he would win first place before the Taoist assembly? They looked Zhang Xueqi up and down, only to see that he was full of spirit and his eyes were bright. He stood where he was and was really tall. He did have the demeanor of a master of a famous sect and could be called a first-class master of the younger generation in the cultivation world. However, there were many sects and masters in the Taoist assembly. Zhang Xueqi dared to boast that he would win first place. There was no doubt that he relied on the powerful magical weapon of the Qingqing sect, the Sanhuang sword. Everyone's eyes finally fell on the inconspicuous 3-feet-long sword wrapped in grey cloth on Zhang Xueqi's back. They thought to themselves, is this the famous Sanhuang sword, known as the top magical weapon in the world? See. Chapter 473. Go to watch net. The 2 ushers of the Gazao sect looked at the Sanhuang sword behind Zhang Xueqi, smiled at the same time, cupped their hands, and said, "It turns out that you are from the Qingqing sect. Please come in, please come in." Zhang Xueqi also cupped his hands and smiled. He looked at Du Fei and the others and asked curiously, "This is?" Without waiting for an introduction, Du Fei smiled and saluted with one hand. "Xuanzhen Dragon Sect, Du Fei." Wei Qing also smiled and bowed. "I'm Wei Qing." Zhang Xueqi smiled and returned the salute. His eyes finally fell on Yu Sheng. When his eyes met Yu Sheng's, his body immediately shook slightly. He frowned subconsciously, narrowed his eyes and said, "Then this must be the 3-eyed Zhenren Yu Sheng." Yu Sheng snorted, put his hands behind his back, and said lightly yes. Zhang Xueqi saw that Yu Sheng was arrogant. He was also a proud person. How could he see anyone more arrogant than him? He snorted and said, "I heard that Zhenren Yu fought with Zhenren Li before and almost harmed mortals. I just don't know who won and who lost." Yu Sheng frowned and looked at Wei Qing with displeasure. It seemed that he was very dissatisfied that Wei Qing had spread the news about this matter to the entire cultivation world. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. When Wei Qing saw Yu Sheng glaring at her, she stuck out her tongue guiltily. Just as she was about to say a few words for Yu Sheng, she heard Zhang Xueqi laugh and say, "In fact, it doesn't matter who wins or loses. The important thing is not to be discovered by the secular mortals. Otherwise, wouldn't we cultivators have wasted our time in cultivating our magical powers?" As he said this, Zhang Xueqi smiled at Du Fei and said, "Zhenren Du, you are the eldest senior brother. You should supervise your junior brothers in their practice. Otherwise, if their kung fu is not good enough, they will harm others and themselves." This sentence made the people of the Xuanzhen Dragon sect so angry that they almost lost their temper on the spot. Yu Sheng even opened his eyes wide and stared at Zhang Xueqi, clenching his fists tightly. When the fat usher of the Gazao sect saw this, he immediately tried to smooth things over and said, "Oh, we are all fellow Taoists. If there are any grievances, let's talk about it on the boat. How can we get angry here? Zhenren Du, Zhenren Zhang, Zhenren Yu, please come in." The thinner one also advised, "That's right, that's right. 2,000 years ago, we were all from the same source. Why do we have to argue?" Yu Sheng was young and aggressive. He sneered and said, "Who has the same origin as them? Are you even worthy?" Zhang Xueqi sneered, "Yes, of course you don't deserve it." Yu Sheng's eyes widened and he was about to lose his temper. Wei Qing, who was standing to one side, had sharp eyes and saw several people in Taoist robes walking over from a distance. She quickly changed the topic and said, "Hey, look, another fellow Taoist is coming. Hey, why are they wearing Taoist robes?" Du Fei, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but say curiously, "Yes, it's been many years since I've seen someone wearing Taoist robes attend the Taoist assembly." The Taoist assembly had been held for more than 1,300 years since the time of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang. In the beginning, the Taoist assembly was a grand gathering of Taoist cultivators in the world. Those who were not from the Taoist sects could not participate, so naturally, all the participants were Taoists wearing Taoist robes. However, with the changes of the times, in order to adapt to the development of the dynasty, the Taoist sects resumed the Taoist assembly. In order to avoid the eyes and ears of the world, and even more so to avoid the taboo of the current government, many cultivators changed to ordinary people's casual clothes. Gradually, this formed a tacit rule of the Taoist assembly. But today, more than a dozen Taoist cultivators in Taoist robes had suddenly come all the way. How could they not be surprised? Even Zhang Xueqi and Yu Shang, who had been angry at the beginning, couldn't help but be stunned and wonder in their hearts. But when these people got closer, they found that the person in the lead had a dignified appearance with a cinnabar mole between her eyebrows. It was Zhang Ling, the elder sister of Taoist Zhang, the leader of the Xueqi school. Only then did they know that this group of people in Taoist robes were actually fellow Taoists of the Xueqi school. Although the Gazao sect and the Xueqi school had done a lot of dirty things in private, they were still very dignified on the surface. The two Taoists in charge of welcoming the guests immediately went up to greet them. The fatter one saluted with one hand and said, "It turns out that the fellow members of the Xueqi school have come. Please come in." Zhang Ling was followed by more than a dozen people, and the one who followed her the closest was her disciple, Zhou Ping. Next to Zhou Ping stood the dignified Wang Lingfei and a well-behaved little girl, who was also wearing a Taoist robe. It was the little shimmy who had been monitoring Li Yunyang's family with her before. Zhang Ling didn't even look at the two of them, nor did she look at the people of the Chuanjin Dragon sect and the Qingqing sect. She raised her head and walked inside. Since they took the lead, the others naturally followed suit. Only the little shimmy looked at Du Fei, Yu Shang, Zhang Xueqi, and the others curiously. Then she stuck out her tongue and quickly followed them. The behavior of the people of the Xueqi school made the people who had wanted to be polite to the people of the Xueqi school feel embarrassed. The people of the Gazao sect were angry in their hearts. Good heavens, I thought Yu Shang was arrogant enough, but I didn't expect that Zhang Xueqi from Chengdu, Sichuan, would be even more arrogant than Yu Shang. Now, it turns out that the most arrogant one is yet to come. The Xueqi school simply ignores everyone. Are they so arrogant just because their sect is powerful? Yu Shang and Zhang Xueqi also stared at the Taoist priests of the Xueqi school with twinkling eyes. Just as they were about to sneer and ridicule them, another Taoist priest in a Taoist robe suddenly followed them. Although he was in a hurry, this Taoist priest had delicate features, a handsome face, and eyes like stars. At first glance, they could tell that he was a great young master. They took a closer look and saw that the Taoist priest was wearing a Taoist robe with gold rims and a black and white 8 trigrams pattern on his chest. Du Fei took a look and saw that this person was Zhang Tianhe, the Yuyang Zhenren whom he had met once on Mount Tianlong. Zhang Tianhe? Has his injury healed? Du Fei was slightly stunned. He took the initiative to step forward and salute. Zhenren Zhang, how have you been? Zhang Tianhe stopped with a smile and said, "It turns out to be Zhenren Du. Nice to meet you." Du Fei smiled and said, "Why is Zhenren Zhang walking at the back?" Zhang Xueqi, who was standing to one side, was very unhappy after being treated coldly by Zhang Ling and the others. At this time, he vented all his anger on Zhang Tianhe. He sneered and said, "Is it because Zhenren Zhang's injury hasn't healed after the battle on Mount Tianlong?" The battle on Mount Tianlong had been regarded by Zhang Tianhe as a great shame. When he heard Zhang Xueqi mention it, his face suddenly changed slightly. He saluted with one hand and said, "May I ask who this fellow Taoist is?" Zhang Xueqi snorted and said, "Zhang Xueqi of the Qingyang Palace in Chengdu." Zhang Tianhe smiled slightly and retorted sarcastically, "It turns out to be Zhang Xueqi, the fellow Taoist who was sent down the mountain by Li Yundong at the foot of Mount Tianlong." "I'm sorry." Zhang Xueqi had fought with Li Yundong in private and suffered a loss. He had always thought that it was a secret and no one knew about it, but he hadn't expected that it would be pointed out by Zhang Tianhe. Zhang Xueqi's face changed and he was shocked. How did he know? Could it be that Li Yundong has spread it everywhere? Humph, it must be so. This despicable man, I must teach him a lesson today. As the saying goes, People strive for dignity, while Buddhas strive for incense. Although cultivators pay attention to pure hearts and few desires and are indifferent to fame and fortune, they regard their reputation as more important than anything else. Moreover, at this time it was the beginning of the Taoist assembly. If he admitted this matter, wouldn't he be admitting that he was inferior to Li Yundong? How could Zhang Xueqi, who had always thought highly of himself, be willing to do such a thing? Zhang Xueqi sneered and said, "There's no such thing. I really don't know what nonsense you're talking about." Yu Shang, who had been ridiculed by Zhang Xueqi before, also took the opportunity to add insult to injury. He sneered sinisterly, "If you don't want people to know, don't do it." "What, Zhang Xueqi, haven't you been educated? Oh, I really don't know why your father let you come out at ease. Isn't he afraid that you'll make a fool of yourself?" Zhang Xueqi suddenly became furious and glared at Yu Shang. Yu Shang did not show any weakness, and his eyes were as sharp as knives. Zhang Tianhe, who was standing to one side, saw the two of them staring at each other like fighting cocks. He laughed and said, "Brothers of the Tao, please go ahead. I'll leave now." Zhang Xueqi and Yu Sheng immediately turned their heads and said in unison, "Don't go." Zhang Tianhe turned his head and sneered. "What, do you want me to stay?" Zhang Xueqi sneered and said, "I just want to test your kung fu skills." The Taoist of the Gazao sect, Du Fei, and the others were stunned. The fatter Taoist of the Gazao sect whispered, "Shixiang, what should we do? It seems that the situation is getting more and more difficult." The thinner Taoist also whispered, "Forget it, let's watch them fight." On the other side, Wei Qing of the Chuanjin Dragon sect saw that the three of them were about to fight, so she tried to persuade them, "Well, stop talking. The three of you have all suffered at Li Yundong's hands. As the saying goes, every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. When Li Yundong comes, it won't be too late for you to fight." When Zhang Xueqi, Yu Shang, and Zhang Tianhe heard this, they were stunned at the same time. They immediately felt the same hatred for the enemy. Zhang Xueqi sneered and said, "Does Li Yundong dare to come?" Yu Shang also said coldly, "If he dares to come, I will definitely make him lose convincingly this time." Zhang Tianhe was silent, and a sharp light suddenly flashed in his eyes. Since he had been defeated by Li Yundong last time, he had gone back to cultivate in seclusion. His cultivation and kung fu were no longer the same as before. He had been waiting for the day to wash away his shame. Chris, John and Alba, who were watching all this from a distance, also stared at the Taoists in different clothes. Alba couldn't help asking, "Chris, what's going on? Who are these people in robes? Are they monks?" Chris didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Don't joke around. They are Taoist priests, cultivators of Taoism. Buddhism came from India, and Taoism is a native religion of China." Only then did Alba understand. "Oh, I see. But why are some of them dressed like this and others like that?" John shrugged his shoulders and said, "This is a free country. At least, we can wear clothes freely, can't we?" Alba rolled her eyes at him. "Thank you for your explanation. I'm very satisfied with it. So, Mr. Liberal, can you tell me how we can get in and watch this Taoist assembly? Are we going to watch it from the shore later?" John smiled bitterly and said, "We can't watch it from the shore. You know, this cruise ship can move." Alba turned to look at Chris. "Chris, hurry up and think of a way." Chris spread out her hands. "What can I do? We are not Taoist priests." Alba couldn't help shouting, "We came all the way here from the United States. Are we going to be stumped?" While the three foreigners were staring at each other, at their wits' end, Chris suddenly heard a familiar voice. "Yundong, is that the cruise ship? Why is the Taoist assembly being held here? It's so strange." Chris turned her head and saw a beautiful and lovely girl snuggling up to a handsome man, talking with a sweet smile. Although they were far away, Chris still recognized at a glance that the girl with a beautiful voice like a silver bell was Su Chan, and the man next to her was Li Yundong. Even though Chris was from a big family and had an extremely strict upbringing, she couldn't help but pull John's arm excitedly. "John, look, who is this?" At first, John looked over listlessly, but when he saw who it was, his eyes suddenly widened and he jumped up excitedly. He laughed and said, "It's Master, Master is here." Alba was stunned. "Lose? What do you mean lose? Is it Li Yundong you were talking about?" Is that the asterisk starred here? Where is he? I want to scold him to death. In the distance, Hardadef shouted excitedly, attracting many passers-by to look at him. Du Fei and the others also looked at them. Du Fei smiled bitterly and couldn't help but glare at his little junior sister. Speak of the devil, and the devil comes. Wei Qing, you really have a jinx. Wei Qing didn't seem to see Du Fei's gaze. She also saw Li Yundong at a glance and shouted excitedly. Look, Zhenren Li is here. Zhang Xueqi, Yu Shang, and Zhang Tianhe immediately looked at Li Yundong at the same time. It was as if Mars had collided with Earth, and a strong zhenqi surged around them. The wind was fierce and murderous, as if they were going to fight in the next second. Vote for recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Vixen at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Vixen at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 474. Go to watch net. Seeing that a big fight was about to break out before the Taoist assembly had even begun, the two Taoist ushers of the Gazao sect were so anxious that they were sweating profusely. They tried to persuade one of them but failed to persuade the other. It was really like holding the gourd down and the ladle up. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. What's more, Wei Qing, who was eager to see the world in chaos, was fanning the flames from time to time. Especially when she saw Li Yundong, her eyes lit up, and her excited expression seemed to be saying, Fight, fight, hurry up and fight. Let's see who's more powerful. Du Fei had been cultivating in the secular world for a long time. As the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjin dragon sect, he was also relatively stable. He thought with a headache, isn't this little sister too strange? Why was he trying to mediate the fight and then causing trouble? The fat Taoist usher of the Gazao sect said with a wry smile, Dear Zhenren, today is a big day in our cultivation world, which happens once every 4 years. It's not a big deal to fight here, but it's a big deal to make the government unhappy. Even if we win, we'll be covered in blood. What glory is there to celebrate? The thinner Taoist also hurriedly persuaded, if you have any grudges, can't you solve them at the Taoist assembly later? Zhang Tianhe was the first to withdraw his gaze. He smiled slightly and said, You two are right. We'll see what happens at the Taoist assembly later. After saying that, he walked towards the cruise ship at the dock. Zhang Xueqi and Yu Shang looked at each other and boarded the cruise ship one after another. Only Du Fei and Wei Qing had a good relationship with Li Yundong, so they stayed and watched him approach. Wei Qing watched as Li Yundong approached with a group of little foxes from the Fox Zen School, surrounded by Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and the others. She couldn't help but laugh and say, It said that Zhenren Li is a romantic saint. Now it seems that it's true. He really deserves his reputation. But it's no wonder. This Li Zhenren is modest, gentle, and humorous. He's also handsome, and his cultivation and kung fu are also very good. No wonder so many people like him. When a woman looks at a man, and when a man looks at a man, the angle is completely different. Du Fei looks at Li Yundong's bearing and spirit. It had been more than a month since they had last parted. Li Yundong's appearance at this time obviously meant that he had subdued the burning thumb pot. Du Fei knew how difficult it was to subdue the burning thumb pot, so he had not used it for a long time. Du Fei looked at Li Yundong carefully and couldn't help but say to Wei Qing, Shimmy, do you think there's anything different about Li Yundong? Wei Qing sized him up and nodded with a smile. Yes. Du Fei couldn't help but smile and nod. Yes, I noticed it too. What do you think is different? Wei Qing smiled and said, You've become even more handsome. You've become more mature. Du Fei was so angry that he laughed. Why do you only pay attention to this? Wei Qing looked at him in confusion. Then what should I pay attention to? Du Fei shook his head and helplessly said, Master is kind enough to let you enter the secular world to cultivate and gain experience. But you're reading fashion magazines all day, chasing this star today and that star tomorrow. What's the use of just paying attention to people's appearance? We cultivators cultivate on the inside, not the outside. Wei Qing was not convinced and retorted, I have paid attention to his inner qualities. Du Fei glared at her. Still talking back. You haven't paid attention to anything. Wei Qing glared back without showing any weakness. I feel that he has matured. Isn't maturity coming from the inside? Du Fei was so angry that he laughed. Just as he was about to teach his little shimmy a lesson, he saw that Li Yundong and the others had already walked over. Li Yundong cupped his hands with a smile and said, "Zhenren Du, we meet again." Du Fei had no choice but to glare at Wei Qing, indicating that he would let her go for the time being. He turned his face, laughed and cupped his hands. "Zhenren Li, I haven't seen you for half a month. Your cultivation has become more and more refined. Just now, when you came from afar, you already had the bearing of a master. Congratulations." Li Yundong smiled modestly and said, "Not at all. I have to thank you for your help, Zhenren Du." Du Fei laughed and said, "Don't mention it. We're all in the same boat. There's no need to be so polite." While Li Yundong and Du Fei were chatting, a shout suddenly came from not far away. A foreign man with a strange accent shouted, "Master, master." Li Yundong was slightly stunned when he heard the voice. He only felt that it was a little familiar, but he couldn't remember who it was for a moment. When he turned his head to look, he was shocked. Li Yundong saw Hardadef, Chris, and a tall foreign girl with a South American style running over. He asked curiously, "Hardadef? Chris, why are you here? Is there another exchange student in the school this year?" Hardadef looked excited. He said loudly in a non-standard Chinese language, "Master, you said that if I could speak Chinese, you would accept me as your disciple." Li Yundong smiled bitterly in his heart. "Oh no, I just said it casually at that time, but this guy is so stupid that he took it seriously." Li Yundong didn't answer him. He turned to look at Chris and asked, "Chris, why are you here?" Chris lifted her wavy blonde hair and said with a smile in a standard Chinese language, "I'm also here to be your disciple." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "Didn't I tell you last time that my kung fu is only passed on to men and not to women?" Chris seemed to have expected that Li Yundong would say this. She pointed at Hardadef and said, "Then you should accept him, because you promised him that as long as he could speak Chinese, you would accept him as your disciple. Chinese have a saying that goes, 'A promise is worth 9 tripods.' For your words, we came here from the distant United States. You should keep your promise." Hardadef, who was standing to one side, also puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach, as if he were a Boy Scout waiting to be inspected by an officer. His face was full of nervousness and excitement. From time to time, he glanced at Li Yundong, and his hands, which were beside his trousers, kept sweating. From time to time, he grabbed his trousers and wiped them. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. He hadn't expected that Chris would actually block his words here, making it impossible for him to refute. He sighed and said, "Chris, if you want to learn kung fu, I can teach you." "No problem." Hardadef hurriedly shouted, "No, master, I want to learn your superhuman kung fu, the kind that can send people flying with one punch and dodge bullets. If I wanted to learn kung fu, I could have learned it in the United States. Why did I come here?" Li Yundong shook his head. "That won't work, Hardadef." Hardadef was so anxious that he blurted out in English, "God, why not? Can't I speak Chinese?" Alba, who was standing to one side, had been listening to them speak Chinese and was confused. At this time, she finally heard a sentence that she could understand. She immediately said to Li Yundong, "Hey, are you still living in the old era of the last century? Why are you so young and full of old ideas? Please, it's the 21st century now. Look around you. Your compatriots are so open-minded. They are no different from us Americans in many ways. Why are your ideas so old-fashioned? Why can't Hardadef be your disciple? Why can't Chris? Is it just because she's a woman? What's wrong with women? What can't women do?" Alba spoke hurriedly and quickly, like a light machine gun, firing off a lot of words. Li Yundong listened with his eyes wide open. After a while, he turned his head to look at Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. Did anyone understand what she said? Zhou Qin's English was good, but after all, it was different from Native Americans. Even Americans with slow reactions might not be able to fully understand Alba's fast speech. She smiled bitterly and said, "I only understood 2 sentences." Zi Yuan also shook her head and said with a smile, "I don't understand either." Su Chan blinked and asked, "She's just a barbarian. Why do you care about her?" Li Yundong smiled and tapped Su Chan's nose. "You're more xenophobic than I am." Chris said, "How about I translate it?" Before Li Yundong could speak, he saw Wei Qing giggling with her mouth covered. Li Yundong turned around and said to her with a smile, "Jinren Wei, do you understand?" Wei Qing quickly waved her hand. "I don't deserve to be called a Jinren. I understand a little. If you don't mind, I'll translate it for you." Li Yundong chuckled. "That's good. Hurry up and translate." Wei Qing smiled and translated Alba's words. Li Yundong listened carefully. After he finished, he said to Wei Qing, "I have a few words to say. Help me translate." Chris, who was standing to one side, said indignantly, "Why can't I translate?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Chris, I know you have a good understanding of Chinese culture, but that's only for Americans. You're still far from truly understanding Chinese culture. There are many things that your translation may not be as accurate as Jinren Wei's." Wei Qing made a face at Chris with a smile, and Chris turned her head angrily. Li Yundong said politely to Alba, "Beautiful American lady, thank you very much for your kind reminder. But if you have read the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, you should know this sentence. It goes like this: a fish can't escape from the abyss, and the sharp weapons of a country can't be shown to others." What does this mean? It means that the most important things of a country can never be shown to outsiders. If I wanted to see your country's confidential information, would your people let me see it? Wei Qing looked at Li Yundong with admiration and secretly gave him a thumbs up. She laughed and said in a low voice, "Good eloquence." Wei Qing smiled and translated Li Yundong's words. Then she said to John sympathetically, "Don't think about it. Hurry back to the United States. We welcome your Taoism, but if you want to learn our cultivation skills, that's absolutely impossible." At this time, Li Yundong also laughed and said, "It's not impossible." Wei Qing and Du Fei were stunned at the same time. Du Fei blurted out, "Jinren Li, you can't do that. In the past 2,000 years, no one in our cultivation world has ever dared to accept a barbarian as a disciple. If you accept them, you will become the target of the cultivation world." Li Yundong smiled and waved his hand, saying disapprovingly, "Jinren Du, this is a little inappropriate. In my opinion, Wan Jin Yuan, the master of the Gazao sect, is a mixed-race person." The fat Taoist usher of the Gazao sect, who had been silent all this time, said unhappily, "Jinren Li, our sect master only looks like him. He is from Xinjiang, so he looks like a foreigner." Li Yundong laughed and said, "That's right. The people of Xinjiang are also our children. But have you ever thought about what happened hundreds or even thousands of years ago? Before the Xinjiang people became part of our Chinese territory, were they the so-called barbarians that we speak of?" Li Yundong's words stunned everyone, and they all looked thoughtful. Li Yundong continued, "Moreover, our country has always regarded itself as the Central Kingdom. For thousands of years, countless foreign nationalities, which we call barbarians, invaded the Central Plains. In the end, they were all assimilated and became a part of the Chinese nation. In the end, we all recognize them as part of the Chinese nation. What does this mean? It means one thing. As long as they speak the Chinese language, learn Chinese culture, believe in Chinese beliefs, and have Chinese nationality, they are part of the Chinese people. I can teach them the art of cultivation." Du Fei listened attentively, especially when he heard the words, "have Chinese nationality." He couldn't help cheering in his heart and thought to himself, "Jinren Li is really cunning. It's too embarrassing to refuse directly, but he actually gave these foreign devils such a difficult problem. Are these foreign devils willing to change their nationality for cultivation?" Vote for recommendation, previous page, return to the table of contents, next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Raising a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Raising a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Raising a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 475. Go to Watch Net. In the eyes of other cultivators, speaking the Chinese language, learning Chinese culture, and believing in Chinese beliefs were not difficult. However, if one wanted to change their nationality, the entire concept would change. If Chris, John and Alba wanted to learn cultivation, they would have to change from American to Chinese. Not to mention whether they were willing or not. Even if they were willing, it would be difficult for other sects to use this as an excuse to attack Li Yundong. Watch net. 7K. Oath M. Du Fei secretly gave Li Yundong a thumbs up and praised him in his heart. I really didn't misjudge Li Yundong. Not to mention his cultivation at such a young age, he is also very quick-witted. In the blink of an eye, he was able to solve such a big problem. Amazing good means. Wei Qing also looked at Li Yunyang with admiration as she translated. After she finished, Hardadef was stunned on the spot, as if he had lost his soul. John, who thought of things very simply, always thought that as long as he came, Li Yundong would accept him as an apprentice, just like in the movies, and then he would start a magical journey. But what he didn't expect was that Li Yundong knew the most important national treasure of the Chinese nation. It couldn't be passed on easily. Hardadef's face was ashen, and he stood there as if he had lost his parents. Chris also stared at Li Yundong in disbelief. She said in surprise, "You actually want us to change our nationality? You're making things difficult for me. You're going too far." Li Yundong shook his head calmly. "Chris, you're the one who's forcing me. You won't be able to understand what you're trying to learn. It's definitely not the kind of kung fu that you see in movies and TV shows. This is a technique that can surpass life and death, surpass the heavens and earth. If you can't do the 4 points, I will never accept you as my disciples." Chris looked at his determined expression and couldn't help shouting, "Then why didn't you make it clear at the beginning?" Li Yundong sighed and said with a wry smile, "I thought that you would forget all this when you went back. It's my fault. I apologize to you. I never thought that you would come back." Chris felt as if she had been humiliated. Her pretty face flushed, and her eyeballs kept rolling in her eye sockets. Seeing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He shook his head and said to Su Chan, who was very obedient and silent, "Let's go." The little foxes glanced at Chris and the others, taking pleasure in their misfortune, and then walked past them. Zhou Qin glanced at Chris. She felt some sympathy for this girl who had traveled thousands of miles to China. She felt that this girl's stubbornness and persistence were somewhat similar to her own. She deliberately fell last and then said to Chris, "We Chinese have a saying that good things are strewn with setbacks. If you have seen The Journey to the West, you should know that Sun Wukong and Tang Sanzang went to the West to seek Buddhist scriptures. They went through 81 difficulties along the way and finally obtained the true scriptures. If you really want to learn cultivation, then don't be afraid of these difficulties. Take these difficulties as your tests. Only real tests and tempering will make you stand out." After that, she sighed softly and followed Li Yundong closely onto the cruise ship. Although Chris had heard Zhou Qin's words, how could she listen to them at this time? John, who was beside her, also lowered his head dejectedly and kept muttering, "What should I do? What should I do? Master won't accept me." However, after hearing Wei Qing's translation, Alba shouted angrily, Damn it, damn it. How can there be such an ungentlemanly man? Are all Chinese men so chauvinistic? This is male chauvinism. This is abominable dictatorship and totalitarianism. There is no reason in the world to force people to change their nationality before accepting them as disciples." After Alba cursed for a while, she suddenly said angrily to Chris, "Chris, we came to China after suffering untold hardships. We can't come here in vain. Humph, if he doesn't accept you as his disciples, then I will ruin this stupid Taoist assembly." John was shocked and said, "Alba, you can't do anything stupid." Alba said angrily, "Bullshasterisk. What stupid thing? This is the stupidest thing you've ever done. You came to China from the United States like a fool to be taught a lesson. For God's sake, is there anything more stupid than this?" John said angrily, "Sich*t. The stupidest thing in the world is that you were F*king dumped by Jack and then F*king followed us here." Alba was so ashamed that her eyebrows were raised. "What did you say?" Chris finally couldn't stand it anymore. She said angrily, "Shut up, both of you." Alba and John turned to look at Chris at the same time. The two of them frowned and glared at her angrily. Chris glared at them without showing any weakness, then pointed to the side of the road and said, "Do you want these Chinese people to laugh at us?" Alba said sarcastically, "These Chinese people? Those Chinese people. You can become Chinese for this stupid cultivation. Chris said angrily. Alba, shut up. Alba snorted and turned her head away. She looked at the people on the side of the road who were pointing at them and suddenly had an idea. She laughed and said, I know how to make trouble. As she said this, she pointed at Chris and said, Don't F*** King stop me, or I'll fall out with you. Chris looked at Alba's determined expression, pressed her forehead, and shook her head. Do whatever you want. Let me be quiet for a while. Alba sneered. She ran to the roadside phone booth, put in a 1 yuan coin, and dialed a number. When she put down the phone and walked over proudly, Chris couldn't help but ask, Alba, why are you calling? Alba couldn't help laughing. I called the police. Chris and John looked at Alba with their mouths agape and stammered, What? You called the police? Alba laughed and said, They won't let us attend the Taoist assembly, so I won't let them hold it. I just called the police station and told them that someone was holding an illegal party. Chris was shocked and said, Alba, are you crazy? Don't you know that it's illegal to lie to the police? Do you want to be arrested and sent back to China? Alba laughed and said, Okay, send me back. It'll save me a plane ticket. John said sarcastically, Come on, they'll send you to a remote place to dig sand. When you earn enough money for the plane ticket, they'll send you back. Given the cheap labor commission in China, I think you won't be able to earn back the money for the plane ticket until you're old. The American media had always demonized the totalitarian rule of China. When Alba heard what John said, she was also a little afraid. She stared blankly and said, No way? Is it really that scary? John added fuel to the fire. That's right. Think about it. A young, beautiful, sexy, and adorable girl like you is stranded in a construction site in the wilderness. There are only barbaric and vulgar men there. What kind of terrifying and inhuman torture would you have to endure every night? Alba was so frightened by John that her face changed a little. She stammered, John, don't scare me. Chris saw that Alba was really frightened. She glared at John and then comforted him. Alba, did you use English on the phone just now? Alba nodded, then opened her mouth and pointed to her tongue. Of course. Do I look like someone who can tie a bow knot with their tongue? John laughed and said, You idiot. Can they understand you if you call the police in English? Alba patted her chest and felt a little relieved. It's better if they don't understand. Chris suddenly thought of something and said, It seems that China's current alarm system has a recording device. Alba became nervous again. What? Then let's hurry up and run. Chris looked at Alba with a mixture of anger and amusement. She thought for a moment and said, Let's wait in a place farther away and see what happens. John and Alba looked at each other and nodded together. Then they quickly fled the scene with Chris like thieves. Just as Chris and the others were looking at the white yacht from afar anxiously, Li Yundong and the others had already arrived at the yacht. Before boarding the yacht from the dock, Li Yundong saw a yellow-faced, yellow-bearded man standing at the entrance of the yacht's deck. The man saw Li Yundong and the many beautiful women behind him. He was slightly stunned and frowned secretly. He said in a deep voice, Please report your sect and hand over the golden invitation. This is Sun Beitian, the Sherpa of Wanjin Yuan, the leader of the Gazao sect. He is a great cultivator who lives in seclusion. His cultivation and kung fu are definitely not inferior to that of Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school. I didn't expect him to come out today and even act as a greeter. It seems that the Gazao sect really attaches great importance to the Taoist assembly today. Li Yundong nodded slightly. He turned to Du Fei who had come in with him, and said with a smile, Zhenren Du, please go first. Du Fei was slightly stunned, but he didn't think too much about it. He cupped his hands and smiled at Li Yundong, then quickly walked to the front and took the initiative to hand over a golden invitation. Sun Beitian opened it and glanced at it with a smile on his face. He said, It turns out to be Zhenren Du of the Chuanjin Dragon sect. Please come in. After that, he took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, Zhenren Du and Zhenren Wei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect have arrived. At this time, there were more than a dozen cultivators from different sects on the yacht. There were about 200 or 300 of them. They were chatting when they heard a shout outside. They immediately quieted down and looked at the door one after another. As the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, although Du Fei's cultivation and kung fu were not the best, He was a forthright person and held great economic power in the sect, so his words carried a lot of weight in the cultivation world. As soon as he arrived, everyone looked at him. Some of them had never seen Du Fei before, so they wanted to see what this world-famous jade-face golden monkey looked like. They looked over and saw that the first person to come in was a tall girl with a pleasant appearance. When the girl saw everyone looking at her, she blushed and turned her eyes. Then, she saw Yu Shang and the others of the Chuanjian dragon sect and quickly ran over to them and sat down. Only Du Fei entered the door alone. He was not in a hurry to take his seat. He just smiled and cupped his hands at everyone. Everyone saw that Du Fei was still neither humble nor arrogant on such an occasion. He smiled calmly and had an extraordinary bearing. They all secretly praised him in their hearts. He is indeed the eldest Shixiang of the Chuanjian dragon sect. His bearing is really amazing. After seeing Du Fei enter, Li Yundong smiled at Zi Yuan and said, "You go first." Zi Yuan asked curiously, "Do you want to go in last?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I want to wait for them to get tired of looking at me. When I go in again, they won't look at me." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Now that your cultivation is so powerful, are you still afraid of being looked at?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "The more powerful a cultivator is, the more afraid they are of being looked at. Otherwise, why would those masters hide? I have to keep a low profile." Ruan Hongling giggled and said, "It's useless. A man like you will attract attention wherever he goes." Li Yundong laughed. Zi Yuan shook her head with a smile and handed over the golden invitation with Ruan Hongling. Sun Beitian opened the golden invitation and looked at it. He looked at Zi Yuan with some emotion and said, "It turns out that you are Wang Yuanshan's disciple. You are indeed extraordinary. Please come in." After that, he announced in a loud voice, "Zhenren Zi Yuan and Zhenren Ruan Hongling, the disciples of Wang Yuanshan of the Zhengyi school of the Linggong sect, have arrived." At this time, when the cultivators on the yacht heard this, they all whispered to each other, "Could it be that beautiful Zi Yuan? Could it be that Zi Yuan, who is known as the top master of the younger generation? Look, we have to take a good look at her." Many of the cultivators in these sects cultivated in seclusion. They would only enter the world once at the Taoist assembly. Therefore, they had only heard of Zi Yuan's name and had never seen her appearance. At this time, some curious young men all stood up to see Zi Yuan's appearance. At this time, they saw Ruan Hongling enter the yacht first. This woman was extremely beautiful, and her eyes were bright and black, which left a deep impression on them. They couldn't help but nod and say, "Yes, she is indeed beautiful." But then a woman in a white dress walked in from behind. This woman seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mist, giving people a feeling of smoke shrouding the cold water and the moon shrouding the sand. They only felt a wave of beauty that could topple a city rush towards them, causing everyone present to hold their breath for a moment, not daring to breathe too loudly. At this time, everyone's mind was filled with the same thought. "Ah, this must be Zi Yuan. How could there be another woman in the world who was so ethereal?" Zi Yuan had long been accustomed to being stared at like this. She walked to a corner with a cold expression. After sitting down with Ruan Hongling, there were still many young cultivators who couldn't control themselves and craned their necks to look at her. After seeing Zi Yuan go in, Li Yundong, who was outside, also calmed down a little. He turned to Su Chan and the little foxes and said, "Don't make any trouble later, or I won't take you out again." Su Chan blinked, covered her mouth with both hands, and said in a muffled voice, "Don't worry, I won't say anything even if you beat me to death." The little foxes all followed suit and said, "I won't say anything even if you beat me to death." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He walked up to Sun Beitian and handed over his golden invitation. Sun Beitian seemed to be very uncomfortable with Li Yundong's behavior of being surrounded by beautiful women. He sneered secretly and casually took the golden invitation and flipped through it. When he saw it, he was suddenly stunned. He suddenly raised his head and asked, "Are you Li Yundong, the leader of the Fox Zen school?" Li Yundong nodded with a smile and said, "Yes." Sun Baitian's eyes widened. He looked Li Yundong up and down carefully for a while, then asked, "Are you the Li Yundong who made a scene in the ancestral court of Mount Gazao? Good news doesn't go out, but bad news spreads thousands of miles." Li Yundong smiled helplessly and said, "It seems to be me." Sun Baitian laughed angrily. "I was afraid that you wouldn't come today, But I didn't expect you to come. Good, good, good. After that, Sun Baitian announced loudly, the leader of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong, has arrived with his disciples. At this time, most of the people on the yacht were still immersed in Zi Yuan's amazing beauty. At this time, when they heard Sun Baitian's shout, they were all shocked at the same time. Zhang Ling, in particular, opened her eyes and stood up abruptly. Her eyes were shining brightly as she looked at the door. As soon as she stood up, Zhou Ping and the other disciples of the Zhengyi school also stood up and looked at the door with unfriendly eyes. Zhang Xueqi, Yu Shang, Zhang Tianhe, and Wang Lingfei, the young handsome men who had had conflicts with Li Yundong, all stood up at the same time and stared at the door. Although some of the cultivators had never seen this young cultivator who had been in the limelight recently, they had more or less heard of Li Yundong stopping the heroes on Mount Tianlong and snatching food from the tiger's mouth on Mount Gazao. They were secretly surprised and curious. They all stood up at the same time and thought, what's so great about this Li Yundong? Could it be that he has 3 heads and 6 arms? For a moment, everyone on the yacht stood up at the same time and looked at the door, waiting to see what Li Yundong, who was famous all over the world, looked like. Chapter 476. Go to watch net. When everyone stretched their necks and looked up, a slim and graceful woman suddenly came in front of them. This woman was extremely beautiful, and there was a cold and stern temperament between her eyebrows. After she came in, she glanced at the crowd lightly. Although she looked quite unfamiliar, she did not have stage fright under everyone's gaze. Instead, her bright eyes made some cultivators subconsciously avoid looking at her. Go to watch net. When everyone saw this, they were secretly surprised and wondered, which sect is this female cultivator from? How can she have such a strong aura? What's more, her appearance and temperament are so outstanding. Has there been another female cultivator in the cultivation world who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Zi Yuan? Ding Nan, who had been standing next to Zhang Yuan, saw this and was even more shocked. She gritted her teeth and thought to herself, damn it, I thought I was cultivating very fast, but I didn't expect Zhou Qin to be even faster. Damn it! Why am I always one step behind her? Am I not as good as her? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Zhang Yuan, who was standing to one side, stared at Zhou Qin with a trace of shock on his face. He thought to himself, how is this possible? She has actually reached the Zhuji phase. How could her cultivation speed be so fast? Damn it, Li Yundong must have fed her the Renyuan Jin Dan. While the two of them were thinking about it, they suddenly saw a girl with rolling eyes behind Zhou Qin. The girl's eyebrows were lively, her eyes were bright, and her appearance was beautiful and charming. There was a hint of immaturity in her beauty, but when she rolled her eyes, there was a hidden charm, which made people involuntarily think, when this girl grows up in the future, she will definitely be a peerless beauty who can turn all living things upside down. The girl was Su Chan. At a glance, she saw everyone's eyes fixed on her. Many male cultivators showed unconcealable greed and possessiveness. She was shocked and shrank back, hiding behind Li Yundong. It was as if she could only feel safe behind this boy. Li Yundong smiled and patted the little girl's head, then walked in by himself. As soon as he entered the yacht, he immediately felt everyone's sharp gazes directed at him. It was like a battlefield filled with blades, spears, swords, and halberds. The surroundings were filled with murderous intent and killing intent. If it had been in the past, Li Yundong's qi might have been stimulated and burst out like a bomb exploding. But now, his qi had changed from being released to being restrained, and his character was not as quick as before. If Li Yundong had been a long river of New River in the past, he would roar majestically and set off huge waves to smash any obstacles in his way. But now, Li Yundong was a towering mountain. No matter how strong he was like a cool breeze caressing the mountain. In the face of this aggressive and suffocating gaze, Li Yundong smiled slightly and cupped his hands to the crowd. Then, he took Su Chan and the little foxes and walked unhurriedly to where Zi Yuan was sitting. The cultivators on the ship saw that Li Yundong's bearing was calm and steady. He was not as sharp as the rumors said, nor did he have that aggressive aura. They couldn't help but think, is Li Yundong afraid? Only a few cultivators, such as Zhang Ling and Zhang Tianhe, vaguely felt that Li Yundong's aura had changed, but they couldn't tell what was different. Zhang Xueqi of the Qingqing sect watched Li Yundong swagger through the market with a group of fox spirits, especially when he sat down next to Zi Yuan in front of everyone. He couldn't help snorting coldly. What an anomaly. In this day and age, there are actually bullies running rampant and evildoers dancing wildly. Hee. Zhang Tianhe, who was not far away from him, heard his words and glanced at Zhang Xueqi. Then, he snorted coldly and looked at Li Yundong unkindly. Especially when he saw Li Yundong and Zi Yuan talking intimately, he couldn't help but show jealousy in his eyes. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails pierced into his flesh, but he didn't even notice it. Most of the cultivators next to Zhang Tianhe were paying attention to Li Yundong and this group of incomparably dazzling fox spirits. Only Zhou Ping looked at Zhang Tianhe affectionately, but when she saw Zhang Tianhe staring at Zi Yuan, she couldn't help but feel a pain in her heart. She gritted her teeth and said to herself, if it weren't for that little B*tc Zi Yuan, Shitty would have been with me. It's all that B*tch's fault. Not only did she take away my Shitty's heart, but she also sat with Li Yundong in public. This is betrayal. Does this woman have any shame? Humph. I must make her lose her reputation. Although Li Yundong's cultivation was excellent, he was not an immortal after all. How could he know the thoughts of everyone in the various sects? After he entered the yacht, he secretly looked around. In his eyes, the yacht was decorated with about 20 or 30 square tables. Beside each table were 10 square stools, and there was an incense burner on the table. In the middle of these dozens of square tables was a large square table. This square table was against the wall, and on it was placed the statue of Laozi, the founder of Taoism. On both sides of Laozi were the statues of Yuanshi Tianzuan and Lingbao Tianzuan. Next to the heavenly primogenitor were the statues of the founders of the Taoist Assembly, Great Zhenren Luo Gongyuan and Yi Fashion. On the other side, next to the heavenly primogenitor Lingbao were the statues of the Jade Emperor and the Queen Mother. On the wall behind these statues was a huge yin-yang 8 trigrams. On both sides of the 8 trigrams were a pair of couplets. The upper couplet on the right was, Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. The lower couplet on the left was, Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. In the middle of the couplet were 4 big words. The Great Way is invisible. When Li Yundong saw this couplet, he couldn't help cheering in his heart. He turned to Zhou Qin and said, Zhou Qin, look at this couplet. It talks about the mystery of our cultivation. You have to keep it in mind. Zhou Qin nodded in agreement. She pointed to the statues in front of the couplet in confusion and asked, I know some of these statues, but I don't know some of them. Master, can you explain them to me? After Li Yundong came out of the 3,000 worldlets, he was no longer an ignorant person. At this time, he had read the classics of Buddhism and Taoism. He smiled and explained them one by one. Su Chan and the little foxes beside him also pricked up their ears and listened with great interest. Just as they were whispering to each other, they suddenly heard a crisp ding sound. This crisp sound was like the ringing of a bell. Everyone looked in the direction of the sound. Li Yundong and the others also stopped talking and looked up. Li Yundong saw a cultivator who was about 1.7 meters tall, with deep eyes and a high nose, and a goatee on his chin, coming out from the back of the cabin. He was the host of this Taoist assembly, Wan Zhenyuan, the leader of the Gazao sect. Wan Zhenyuan was wearing a Taoist robe with long sleeves fluttering in the wind, looking quite elegant. His bright eyes swept across the crowd quickly. When he glanced at Li Yundong's table, his eyes paused for a moment, but he quickly looked away. Wan Zhenyuan walked to the square table at the head of the table, cupped his hands to the crowd, and said, Fellow Taoists, thank you for giving me face and coming to the Taoist assembly. I'm deeply honored. This Taoist assembly will be. Before he could finish his words, he heard someone shouting impatiently, Master Wan, hurry up and take out the rewards of this Taoist assembly. We're here to get treasures, not to listen to you. As soon as this person said this, Li Yundong smiled knowingly, because the person who spoke was none other than Dang Chong of the Penglai sect, whom he had met several times. Dang Chong was sitting at a table with one foot on a stool next to him. He was munching on melon seeds as he yelled. His actions were very conspicuous in the crowd, causing the people around him to roll their eyes at him. Wan Zhenyuan was choked by Dang Chong's words and suddenly couldn't continue. He was angry in his heart and glanced at Dang Chong, but he still smiled and said, It turns out to be a fellow Taoist from the Penglai sect. Nice to meet you. Dang Chong laughed and said, Master Wan, you must want to slap me to death. Last time on Mount Gazao, you wanted it even more this time. Don't be so hypocritical. Hurry up and get to the point. Although Dang Chong was as shameless as a ruffian, his words were crude and his reasoning was not crude. Some cultivators in the cabin couldn't help but laugh and jeer. Well said, Master Wan. Hurry up and get to the point. We're all itching to get impatient. That's right. We've cultivated for more than 10 years. Did we come here to listen to your nonsense? Hurry up and fight. Yes, Master Wan, what's the treasure this time? Take it out and let us have an eye-opener. Wan Jinyuan's face was a little ugly. He forced a smile and was about to speak when he suddenly saw Zhang Ling of the Xueqi school slap the table and stand up. She said sternly, Nonsense. Do you think this is a vegetable market? You're still cultivators. If I didn't know better, I would think that you were all a group of hooligans. Do you think you're a gang or a club? Zhang Ling was a famous cultivator in Jianghu, and she was also the sister of Taoist Zhang of the Xueqi school. Her bearing and prestige were extremely high. As soon as she shouted, the hall suddenly became silent, and no cultivator dared to speak again. Wan Jinyuan glanced at Zhang Ling with an unnatural expression and thought to himself, the power of the Xueqi school is really great. Does Zhang Ling, this fierce dragon, want to overturn the rivers and seas and steal my leadership at the Taoist assembly? While he was thinking this, Zhang Ling said to him, Master Wan, the Taoist assembly held once every 4 years is extraordinary. This is not only a good opportunity for our Taoist sects to recover their vitality and return to the orthodox tradition, but also a good opportunity for our Taoist sects to let go of their past grievances and work together. When Wan Jinyuan heard this, he suddenly became vigilant. He thought to himself, return to the orthodox tradition? Who is the orthodox tradition? Let go of their past grievances and work together? The Xueqi school can't help it anymore. They're going to show their true colors. They're going to unify the Taoist sects. Thinking of this, Wan Jinyuan couldn't help interrupting Zhang Ling. He asked with a fake smile, Then dare I ask Zhenren Zhang Ling, what is the orthodox tradition? Zhang Ling snorted and waved her hand. Then, all the people in Taoist robes of the Xueqi school stood up. Zhang Ling pointed at the Taoist robes they were wearing and said, This is the orthodox tradition. This sentence was meaningful. It not only satirized others for forgetting their ancestors and not even wearing the clothes that Taoist priests should wear at the Taoist assembly, but also hinted that the Xueqi school was the orthodox tradition in the world. Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, Is wearing Taoist robes the orthodox tradition? He waved his hand and shouted, Come out, all of you. Then, a group of Taoist priests in Taoist robes came out of the cabin and looked at the people of the Xueqi school with unfriendly eyes. Zhang Ling saw that these Taoist priests had blocked the yacht and surrounded it. She sneered and said, What's the matter? Master Wan, are you going to catch us all in one fell swoop? Although everyone could hear the intention of sowing discord in her words, they still couldn't help being frightened and vigilant. They looked at the other Taoist priests of the Gazao sect with hostility. Seeing that the situation was about to break out, they suddenly heard a shameless voice say leisurely, If wearing a Taoist robe is the orthodox tradition, then I am also the orthodox tradition. Everyone looked over and saw Dang Chong speaking with a cheeky smile on his face. Someone next to him sneered and said, You're wearing a vest. How is that a Taoist robe? Dang Chong jumped up with a laugh and said carelessly, Brothers of the Tao, look carefully. After saying that, he quickly took off his clothes. In a short while, he was completely naked. The male cultivators in the cabin all laughed in horror, while the female cultivators all blushed and spat, then turned their faces away. Wan Jinyuan shouted angrily, Dang Chong, what are you doing? Dang Chong laughed. He picked up a cup of tea with one hand and said, I'll wear a Taoist robe for you to see. As he said this, he poured the tea on his body and quickly smeared it everywhere with his hands. Everyone saw that there seemed to be a mass of ink hidden in Dang Chong's palm. Wherever he smeared it, it would be dark. After a while, Dang Chong had painted a close-fitting Taoist robe on his body as if he was playing with body painting. After Dang Chong finished, he clapped his hands and laughed. How about it? Brothers of the Tao, is this a Taoist robe? Everyone saw that Dang Chong was wearing a colorful Taoist robe on his chest, but his white body was on his back. They were surprised and laughed at the same time. Dang Chong, what kind of Taoist robe is this? Where's your butt? Why isn't your butt covered by the Taoist robe? Dang Chong, what's that thing in front of you? Is it a dust handle? Dang Chong said without any shame. What is a Taoist robe? Can it cover your shame? If it could, how could you quarrel like this at the Taoist assembly, which is held once every 4 years? His words had a double meaning, and they immediately attracted the cheers of all the cultivators from the other sections. For a moment, the tense atmosphere was greatly reduced. Li Yundong also nodded with a smile and said to Zi Yuan, "This Dang Chong is a ruffian, but he's not a ruffian." Zi Yuan's cheeks turned slightly red. She whispered, "But there's no need to be like this, naked, right?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "I came naked when I was born and left naked when I died. That's a man of character." Zi Yuan glared at Li Yundong angrily. "Then why don't you go and be a man of character?" Li Yundong chuckled and didn't answer. At this time, Wang Jingyuan snorted coldly and waved his hand again. The Taoists disappeared in an instant, as if they had never appeared. He glanced at Dang Chong and then said to Zhang Ling with a sneer, "I'm just telling you, Zhenren Zhang Ling, that you are not the only one who remembers the orthodox Taoism." Zhang Ling also sneered and said, "I also want to remind all the cultivators not to forget their roots at the Taoist assembly." As she said this, she also sat down with the cultivators of her own sect. The people of the other sects saw the secret battle between Wang Jingyuan and Zhang Ling, but in fact, it represented the battle between the number 1 sect of the Niden sect and the number 1 sect of the external alchemy. They all frowned at the same time and thought, has the battle in the cultivation world become so intense? How could he not be able to restrain himself from fighting after just a few words at the Taoist assembly? Su Chan tugged at Li Yundong's sleeve curiously and asked in a low voice, "Yundong, why do I feel like they are going to fight?" Li Yundong chuckled and said in a low voice, "It's okay. Let's just watch them fight." While the two of them were talking in low voices, they heard Wang Jingyuan say, "Since no one wants to listen to nonsense, I won't be long-winded. Let's get someone to bring out the prize of this Taoist assembly." After that, he shouted, "Bring out the powerful magical weapon." Su Chan and Li Yundong stopped talking at the same time and looked at the field at the same time. They both wanted to see what the prize of the Taoist assembly, which was held once every 4 years, would be. Vote recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report. If you like it, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 477. Go to watch net. Wang Jingyuan shouted, and soon 2 beautiful female Taoist priests in Taoist robes came out from the back of the cabin. The 2 female Taoist priests came out holding a large brush that was 2 meters long and nearly half a meter thick. Go to watch net. 7K. Oath M. Everyone saw the huge brush at first glance, and some people who didn't know what it was laughed. "Master Wan, what is this?" Dang Chong, who had put his clothes back on the boat, shouted. "Master Wan, why are you fooling us with such a thing? Isn't this a large mop?" Everyone burst out laughing. Wang Jingyuan really hated Dang Chong in his heart. He gritted his teeth and was angry in his heart, but his face was full of smiles. He said with a smile, "Zhenren Dang Chong is so funny. Fellow Taoists, do you know what kind of powerful magical weapon this is?" There were also cultivators who knew what it was. They carefully looked at the huge brush, and Zi Yuan vaguely saw some clues. She whispered to Li Yundong, "It seems to be an immortal pen?" "An immortal pen?" Li Yundong looked at it carefully and nodded slightly. "It does look a little like it." Su Chan, who was standing to one side, straightened up and said in a low voice, "Is it the magical item used by Xueqi during the 3 Kingdoms period, the immortal pen?" Zi Yuan looked at her with a smile. "It seems so." Su Chan's eyes widened and she said in surprise, "Is it an immortal pen that can write talismans and divine thunder of the 5 elements at will?" Li Yundong smiled and pinched her nose. "It seems to be this immortal pen." Su Chan became excited all of a sudden. "Oh, Yundong, this is a great treasure. You have to get it. You have to get it." Although Zhou Qin had succeeded in the Zhuji phase, her understanding of these powerful magical weapons was almost like a blank piece of paper. She couldn't help asking Su Chan, "What kind of treasure is this? Why are you so excited?" Su Chan grabbed Zhou Qin's arm and asked with her eyes wide open, "Sister Zhou Qin, do you know who Gu Hong is who wrote Hugging Pusey?" Zhou Qin nodded in confusion. "Yes. He is a cultivator who wrote a book to tell the world that gods can't cultivate, but immortals can. Do you know who Gu Hong's master is?" Su Chan asked again. Zhou Qin had also read a lot of Taoist classics, so this knowledge was not difficult for her. She became more and more confused. "Yes, Zheng Yin. Do you know who Zheng Yin's Shifu is?" Su Chan asked. Zhou Qin laughed and said, "Of course I know. It's the Tai Chi immortal Gu Xian, Gu Hong's grandfather." "Su Chan, are you testing me?" Su Chan's eyes widened. "Do you know who Gu Xian's master is?" Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment and said, "Is it Xueqi?" Su Chan shook Zhou Qin's arm excitedly. Yes, Xueqi is the master of the Taiji immortal. He was also the founder of the Pill Cauldron sect. This immortal pen was his personal Dharma treasure. Think about it. Fa Hai's personal magic tool was already so powerful. Isn't this immortal pen even more powerful? Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, also nodded and added, "Yes, it said that the immortal pen can write talismans at will. Even if you write the word thunder, it can attract thunder from the sky." Seeing that Zhou Qin still didn't understand the mystery of the immortal pen, Li Yunyang explained with a smile, "Zhou Qin, you are now full of zhenqi, which is equivalent to a great master with great internal strength in wuxia novels. However, you don't know martial arts moves, so if you fight with others, you may not be able to defeat those cultivators whose zhenqi is not as good as yours but who know a lot of martial arts moves. Especially those cultivators who use talismans. Because they use talismans when they cast magic, they have the three characteristics of speed, accuracy, and ruthlessness. Su Chan once gave me a heavenly thunder talisman. When I used it to cast spells, it only took a few seconds. I could do whatever I wanted, and I didn't have to worry about being hit at all. But if I didn't use the talisman and used my own zhenqi, it would take at least a minute, or even more. The most important thing was that I had to worry about being hit." Hearing this, Zhou Qin suddenly understood. "Ah, I understand. Are these talismans very rare at ordinary times?" Zi Yuan took over the conversation, nodded, and said, "Very rare. It's not an exaggeration to say that they're worth a lot of gold." Only then did Zhou Qin look at the immortal pen in horror. So, if anyone has the immortal pen, doesn't it mean that they have unlimited talismans to use? Zi Yuan laughed and said, "That's not true. If you want to use a magical item like the immortal pen, it will consume a lot of essence qi to write a talisman. I guess if I write 2 talismans like this, all my zhenqi will be used up." Zhou Qin frowned and said, "Then what's the use of this divine item?" Su Chan interrupted with a smile. "Sister Zhou Qin, you're so stupid. You can write it for self-defense. Moreover, talismans weren't something that just anyone could write. The process of learning talismans is very complicated and difficult to understand. My master can only write heavenly thunder talismans, and I can only write invisibility talismans. I can't write anything else." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "I see. I was ignorant." As she said this, she turned her head to look at Li Yundong and urged, "Master, why don't you snatch this immortal pen? It'll be like adding wings to a tiger if you hold it in your hand." Li Yundong had originally thought that Wang Yuan would take out the Diyuan Jindan or the Medicine King tripod, but he hadn't expected that he would take out the immortal pen. Although it was also an extremely powerful magical weapon, Li Yundong was a little uninterested in it. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I have enough powerful magical weapons. Why do I need so many? Besides, powerful magical weapons are the same as magic. They are valuable in quality, not quantity. I haven't even mastered the burning thumb pot yet, and now I have an immortal pen. Aren't you afraid of making others jealous?" Zi Yuan opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but when the words were on the tip of her tongue, she held them back and didn't say anything. Su Chan was unwilling to give up and said, "Yundong, I remember that you have visualized the Dharmakaya of the immovable Wisdom King. You have 6 magical items in your hands, and one of them is this immortal pen. It means that it will be your powerful magical weapon sooner or later." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Since it will be mine sooner or later, I'm not in a hurry. Don't you see so many people here looking at this immortal pen eagerly? Since so many people want to snatch it, I won't join in the fun. If it's really mine, even if I don't want to snatch it, it will still fall into my hands. Ruan Hongling, who had been silent all this time, snorted and muttered in a low voice. You have a powerful magical weapon to use, but Xueqi Zi Yuanj. Before she could finish speaking, Zi Yuan stepped on her foot under the table and glared at her. She didn't continue speaking. Hearing this, Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan in confusion and asked, Zi Yuan, what's wrong with you? Zi Yuan smiled. Just as she was about to speak, someone in the field suddenly made a noise and said loudly, Master Wan, this is the immortal pen. This powerful magical weapon hasn't appeared in the world for more than 1,000 years. How did you get it? Wan Zhenyuan looked proud. He smiled and stroked his goatee, saying, Yes, this is the immortal pen used by Taoists Xueqi. If you don't believe me, you can have a look. After that, he pressed his hand on the huge brush, and it immediately shrank automatically. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunk into a small brush that was only 20 centimeters long. Wan Zhenyuan picked up the immortal pen, and the beautiful female Taoist of the Gazao sect next to him obediently held a cup of tea with both hands. Wan Zhenyuan picked up the pen and dipped it in the tea. Then, he wrote the word flower in the air. The word floated in the air without dispersing. After a while, it quickly emitted a dazzling colorful brilliance, and then quickly turned into blooming flowers in front of everyone. Wan Zhenyuan laughed and flicked his sleeve, shattering the flowers hanging in the air. For a moment, petals fell in the cabin, and the fragrance of flowers filled the air. Zhou Qin was stunned. She said in surprise, You can make flowers appear by writing the word flower ? Su Chan also looked at the immortal pen with greed and envy and said, What about the word money ? He couldn't help laughing. He snapped his fingers and flicked Su Chan's forehead. Greedy girl, you only know how to make money. Zi Yuan also couldn't help laughing and said, Flowers are the fruits of wood. The immortal pen can only write about the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire and earth, as well as wind, thunder, and lightning, and turn them into real things. If you write the word money, it won't be able to make money. Su Chan couldn't help but be disappointed. She held her forehead and pouted. At this time, everyone in the cabin believed that this pen was the immortal pen. Their eyes became extremely excited, and they secretly rubbed their palms. They were just waiting for the Taoist assembly to show off their power and seize the treasure. Although Zhang Ling of the Zhangyi school was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be shocked by the prize that Wan Zhenyuan had taken out. She couldn't help but ask, Master Wan, how could you be willing to take out such a treasure as a reward? Wan Zhenyuan laughed heroically. For the prosperity of our Taoist culture and the prosperity of the cultivation world again, I will not hesitate to destroy the Gazao sect. His words caused everyone to cheer in unison. They all said, Master Wan is so bold. Master Wan is so broad-minded. Zhang Ling frowned and thought to herself, No, Wan Zhenyuan is not such a selfless person. He has taken out such an important powerful magical weapon, so he must be planning something big. But what was he plotting? Could it be that he is trying to buy people's hearts? But the price is too high, isn't it? While Zhang Ling was thinking to herself, she saw that some cultivators in the cabin were already impatient and clamoring. Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and fight. Let's see who can take away this immortal pen. Wan Zhenyuan pressed his hands together and said loudly, Everyone, don't worry. Listen to me. It was unknown whether Wan Zhenyuan's heroic words had aroused the respect of everyone, or whether it was because Wan Zhenyuan had taken out the immortal pen that had shocked everyone. As soon as he spoke, the noisy people immediately shut their mouths. Wan Zhenyuan said, Everyone, we are all respected cultivators. Of course, we can't fight randomly like hooligans. Even if we want to fight, we have to come up with a rule. Immediately, a cultivator said with a smile, Master Wan, you worry too much. We will follow the rules of the previous Taoist assembly. Wan Zhenyuan said, Of course not. In the past, the Taoist assembly was held in the depths of the mountains. No one knew if we fought earth-shattering. But this time, we're holding the meeting in the middle of a busy city. Both sides of the moat are either residential areas, shopping malls, or entertainment venues. If we fight, the people outside will be able to hear the commotion. Do you want to turn the place upside down? The 200 or so cultivators in the cabin were dumbfounded when they heard this. Some of them said, Master Wan, if we can't fight, how can we fight? Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, so this time, the rule is, you have to fight, and at the same time, you have to make sure that the mortals outside don't notice. What do you think? The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other. Some of them had low cultivation quotients, so they secretly retreated. Some of them who had high cultivation quotients said loudly, Master Wan, let's do as you say. After a while, most of the cultivators nodded in agreement. Wan Jinyuan nodded and said with a smile, well, since everyone has agreed, I wonder which Zhenren will come out and show his skills first? As soon as he finished speaking, a young man in a tang suit stood up. He cupped his hands and said, Master Wan, I'll go first. Wan Jinyuan took a look and saw that the man had tiger-like eyes and a lion-like nose, and his face was awe-inspiring. Wan Jinyuan cupped his hands and said, it turns out to be Zhenren Chen Yunyan of the Qingwei sect. Sorry for not recognizing you. Chen Yunyan looked around and asked, Master Wan, may I challenge you by name? Wan Jinyuan nodded and said with a smile, as long as you follow the rules, of course you can. Chen Yunyan nodded, then suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Yundong with his eyes like lightning. He pointed at him like a sword and said, Li Yundong, do you dare to accept the challenge? I sincerely apologize to all my readers. Because of some urgent personal matters, I just flew back to Shenzhen from Suzhou. That's why I was delayed yesterday and today. There is still one chapter to update tonight. I will try to make up for yesterday's lack of updates tomorrow. I apologize again. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.